What is happening, y'all? Welcome, welcome, welcome. We'll be with you shortly here. Yep, starting at 8 p.m. Eastern, Justin. Renee, thanks for being here. Steady Eddie. Real happy dude. Over there on the Twitch side, thanks for being here, guys. We'll get started here shortly. Spread the word. This is going to be a good one. Damn, Martin, right? Thank you. No, you are not blocked. UAP Chinese balloon lover, we see you. Silly Goose with Shaken, thank you for being here. Morgan Marshall, welcome. Thank you for being here. Damn. This music's a little too, I don't know. Let's change it. Let's change that too. Hello. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the show. Welcome to Lou Reviews. I am your host, Lou. Actor. Writer. Guy in Hollywood. Sometimes talk about UFOs. Most of the time talk about UFOs. Welcome, everyone. All right. So we've got a good show today. I'm excited to talk about this one because I was hoping these guys would cover Dave Grusch because I think their insight on it, regardless what you think of body behavior or body language experts, the truth is that our government relies on them in interrogations and in terrorists interrogations in particular. You know, so it's not 100%, obviously. I know this, right? But it is interesting because the beautiful thing about this analyzation of Dave Grusch is that you've got 4 different viewpoints here, 4 different points of view, 4 different experts on body language, but all of them have different belief systems. All of them have different experiences working for the government with sometimes classified access to certain things that they are read on. So I think this is a good mixture of minds, level-headed minds that don't have any ties whatsoever to UFO Twitter or the whole UFO discussion as a whole. They have done 2 other episodes, one on Bob Lazar, which I highly recommend checking out, and one that they did on the Pennsylvania case that was on the Unsolved Mysteries, Berkshires. And that one to me was the most interesting of the 2. This one right now is hands down my favorite one. And I think you'll see why, because it's a pretty damn great stripping down and getting straight to the bones of the David Grusch claims and the things that he's saying. And, you know, again, the opinions that these guys come to the table with, and you'll see at some point exasperation. So, and it's not even at some point, it's pretty quickly, but let's check it out, shall we? So before I go into the video, I wanted to just break down who the behavior panel is. So it is a group made up of the world's top 4 body language and behavior experts: Scott Rouse, Mark Bowden, Chase Hughes, and Greg Hartley. Together, they analyze the body language and behavior displayed in videos in the public interest. So they've done a lot of videos on murder suspects. They did, the Amber Heard trial and Johnny Depp. And so anything that's in the public interest, these guys usually cover. And so I'm really happy that in some way that the Dave Grusch story ended up becoming part of the mainstream media for a good 24 hours maybe. So it was enough to move the needle for these guys to cover it. So I'm really happy about that part of it. The Behavior Panel is a nonpartisan group looking to educate and entertain the public with their interests and expertise in nonverbal communication. Let me go ahead and turn this down here real quick. Kill the music. Body language, deception, detection, interrogation, and resistance to interrogation. By looking at the gestures, facial expressions, micro expressions, and context around what people say, this group of nonverbal behavior experts reveals the possible truths and deceptions. This behavior profile group takes on the task of investigating behavior behind the true crime that often forces us to think and feel the way we do. Investigate the behavioral arts and science with us. The Behavior Panel was featured on Dr. Phil. So there you go. Stamp of this is real. This is credible. Dr. Phil. So no, but seriously, in the YouTube world, they, I think, are the biggest and best channel on body language. Again, it's not 100%. I'm not saying this is the nail in the coffin for Dave Grusch, but listen to the things that they say and sort of like what they to me it's insanely revealing. And again, they have no history of ufology. They don't follow the topic whatsoever, and I think that's pretty clear. And in the Bob Lazar breakdown, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was Chase Hughes who was very open to the idea. He wanted the Bob Lazar story to be true. But the biggest thing that all four of them had an issue with is right off the bat, Bob Lazar puts on the table science that nobody can ask questions about. It's physics defying. Okay, well, how do you prod physics defying technology? Like, what questions do you ask that you can actually validate if it is in fact physics defying? It's something immediately that Bob puts on the table that's very hard to dissect, especially if you don't know a lot about physics. So yeah, it's an interesting. I think they walk away pretty neutral with, I might be telling the truth, but I think they were leaning more toward he was lying. I'd have to go back and refresh myself on it, but worth checking out. And I have the link for the entire 2.5 hours, 2 hours and almost 40 minutes that they spent breaking down Dave Grusch. Now, obviously, I recommend, if you haven't seen this, the link is in the description below. Go check out the entire episode. Worth your time. What I'm going to do, just in the interest of time, is what they like to do on the show is play the clip, they talk about it, break it down, and then they play it again, followed by the next clip that they're going to analyze. So we're going to skip the clips and the Dave Grusch aspect and interview part of this. I'm just going to stick to what their conclusions are when listening to Dave Grusch and the things that they find weird about his tics in verbal communication. And right off the bat, it's insanely fascinating. So let's get to it. Again, they've already watched a part of the interview and they're going to start breaking it down immediately.
All right, Greg, what do you got?
Yeah, so let's first start off by talking about a couple of things. He's going to talk a lot about clearance and that kind of thing. And clearances, if you've never been in the military, there are levels of clearance and then there's access. So once you get to the level of clearance, like top secret, then it becomes access. And there are programs past that, I'm sure. You'll hear him talk about things like Title 50 and Title 10. Those are different divisions and different kinds of intelligence. But the problem is, even if I and Chase both have the same clearance, but we don't have a need to know about the other guy's project, guess what? We don't get to know. That's when he talks about red on or red in. He's talking about being part of a program where he gets to have access to that. Otherwise, you get things like Snowden and those kinds of things where they have all this knowledge they can take away and walk away. So compartmentalized information is important. So when he's talking about, I could be read onto anything, it doesn't mean he was, it means he could be. That's a different, very different thing. Let's also talk about what it takes to hide something. You know, if you're a person who has something to hide, which I'm going to tell you as we walk through this thing, there's certainly a glass wall up somewhere.
I'm sure somebody's screaming. I'm sure Silly Goose is screaming at me right now in the chat, and you guys can't even see the video. So let me switch to this. Sorry about that. I wanted to say fair use. Good thing I wasn't showing the video. Fair use. This is a transformative work. We are educating the public and critiquing the videos we are sharing. This is covered under fair use and allowable by law. Let us continue. But it's interesting to say that, you know, so far Greg is saying, hey, look, just because you have the ability to access things doesn't mean you can. That's very important to keep in mind when talking about this. So good point.
Somewhere here. What he's trying to hide, don't know, but he's certainly trying to hide something. And when you're trying to hide something, it gets harder and harder to hold on to that information the longer the conversation goes, because you've got to appease your interviewer. And by that, I mean, you got to keep that person thinking that what you're doing is divulging enough information. When you interrogate a person, that person needs to threshold think. And by that, I steal that from my protective driving days, and we would talk about threshold driving, so that you're right on the brakes, just short of letting the nose dip. That's threshold driving, threshold braking. Threshold thinking is I pay attention to you and I don't go far enough to tip your hand. I have to be very careful. So they have to appease the interviewer, disclose as little information as they can possibly do, and then maintain believability. And those three things are a lot, because the longer you talk, the more likely you are to paint a negative of the exact thing that you're trying to hide, so that it's...
Just wait, Morgan, until they get to Ross Coulthard. It's very interesting what they also have to say about him when it comes to his interviewing techniques.
It's the only thing missing, and people can build a picture of it. That's what intelligence does. That's how we work. This guy starts off threshold thinking. I can see it because he's doing romancer. His eyes are locked. He's paying attention to this guy. We do this in elicitation all the time, because if you overstep your bounds, then the person knows what you're after. This guy's doing romancer. He's got no real answers. He uses words like quite a few, oral testimony, quite a number. I don't hear any real answers so far. I could answer everything he's done. He does, yeah, that's his intro to get in. I do it all the time. It's my intro to boxing in my answer. It gives me 20 seconds to get into the next part of the conversation. So pay attention to what the guy's doing. That's what we're seeing.
All of us guys on the behavior panel, we factor food repair. You don't do fast for the code.
Chase, what do you got?
Okay, we don't get paid for
same kinds of things.
50% off your first factor box.
Subscribe to their channel and
Chase, what do you got?
And
same kinds of things, I'm sure.
Yeah, so let me set the record straight here. 90% of anyone in the military has the ability to be read into any program that they need to operate in. And I'm talking 19-year-olds with a security clearance.
Did you hear what he just said? That is so important to keep in mind when it comes to Dave Grusch. Yes, he has his security clearances. Yes, he can be read into certain programs if he should be read into those programs, if he needs to be read into those programs. But if he does not need to be read into those programs, he does not have access to those programs. And that goes for a 19-year-old kid who just gets top security clearance to the most senior person in the military. I did not know that. And that's, I think, important to know, because when people are making claims, that information can be used to make much broader claims. Let's continue.
Can say that same sentence and be truthful. When he's saying, I'm extremely highly cleared, I think what he might be referring to is the White House level, which is kind of above top secret, if you want to consider that, which most people don't even hear the name of this level of clearance. But, you know, we like to deliver here for you on the behavior panel, and that's called Yankee White. So he's referring to the clearance level of Yankee White, which isn't really a clearance, but it's kind of a nickname for a level of access. So when it comes to clearance, there's no named clearance above top secret, but there are those special access things like this with nicknames and stuff. And if you watched the show before, you know what lip compression is, when somebody squeezes their lips together. But if you see right after he says crash retrieval program, there's a strong lip compression here. And we typically say this indicates somebody's withholding something. And in this instance, he's absolutely holding things back here. He even says that openly. He's only able to share a little bit, but keep an eye out for when you see this lip compression in the coming videos that we're going to dissect for you. We're going to reveal a lot. And there's one thing here that I want to focus on that I think will become glaringly important in the coming videos. When he says the words potentially extraterrestrial, there's the strongest point here of lip compression. He does not think, in my opinion, probably doesn't think that the beings are extraterrestrial. So lip compression being withholding is kind of a good baseline for him. And his vehement yes is then followed by a head shake and a dramatic reduction in volume. And there's also a strong downward left eye accessing, which means like he's kind of talking to himself. We'll talk about this a little bit more later. And I'm about 100% sure what he specifically thinks these things are. I think I know what he thinks they are. And I'm going to show you in one of the videos coming up. But overall, this is probably mostly credible. He's got a strange baseline to begin with. And Scott, what do you got?
All right. His delivery is really smooth, like it's rehearsed, like he's gone over this not 5 times, 10 times, but 20 times. He's done this a whole lot. That's what it sounds like to me. He's really confident. His volume's good. He's got great eye contact. You're right, he's got an odd baseline because he moves so much. His head moves so much, and he uses his whole mouth when he says words and all, when he's talking, and it just looks weird. And it's that overconfidence that children have quite often that I see that. Now, at the same time, I think this is a master class in micro expressions because his mouth movements and his eye movements and his eyebrows and his brow are flying around everywhere. And I think you can lock up the specific words he's saying, and you can see the anger in him, and you can see the fear in him, and you can see the confidence in him. You can see these things when you start narrowing them down, and which we'll go over a little bit later on when we get some really huge ones in here. He said, I had many officials approach me. It sounds like all of a sudden all these people started coming to him, and which makes me go, why is everybody coming to this guy? What's so special about this guy?
Which is a great question. Why is everybody going to Dave Grusch in the government? What is so special about him? A guy that's not read in, that hasn't seen any of these programs, that hasn't been to any of the facilities, that hasn't seen any actual proof of alien bodies or alien spacecraft. Why is everyone in the government coming to him? And who is everyone? Like, it's a great question. It's a great question.
He's supposed to be smart. Apparently he's a physicist or something. Knows all about nuclear energy, all these things that he talks about. He's a pretty smart guy apparently, because I think he got a scholarship or something in physics or chemistry or something. His illustrators are really low. They're in his lap, but they're really affirming. They're when they happen, they're right where they should be. They land right on the words like they should when he's making a point. They're not really big. We're going to see him get a little bit bigger later on. But that so far that lets me know he's controlled because he's rehearsed what he's saying. He's rehearsed the concept. Some of these sentences I think he's actually said before out loud as he's done this. If he was if somebody helped him rehearse this. So it looks really,
I've got
really
a theory on
easy
why
for him to do.
Rehearsed. I'll get to that theory.
When he says, I don't want to denote the origin of where these things came, which he already did. He's already been talking about how they're from, they're from space or they're spaceships. Then he starts talking about these different dimensions, how he brings in all these things that all of a sudden make it possible to happen. It's not what we're used to hearing. We're used to hearing, oh, there's a UFO from outer space. They came to land and these guys got out. Or these things got out. No, he's talking about other dimensions. Now, when you start doing that, these are these exercises that super smart people go through. When they start talking about, all the different dimensions, this could possibly be happening. There's a person just like you and another one, except they've got red hair. And then since you can think it up, there's one that's got, 4 arms, but everything else is the same with all these incredibly incredible dimensions. So I think he's used to those exercises that a lot of intelligent people get into, and they dive deep in, as some of them do, because it exercises their brain. They need something like that to think about outside the box to help them to get that buzz they want when they're being smart. I don't know how to say it so I don't sound like I'm bad mouthing them. I'm not bad mouthing them at all, but I think that's what's happening here. I think I want to say right out of the gate, I'm not so sure about anything from space at this point. Mark, what do you got?
Yeah, I mean, I think he'll tell us later on that space is.
And by the way, Mark Bowden, I think, might be my favorite. I don't want to call them characters, but my favorite personality out of the four, just because he's the most animated and he is really confident when he does his analysis. And I've never seen him go quite this hard on a UFO claimant or someone who's making, a witness of any kind. So to see him get this animated, you'll see very quickly. But yeah, I just wanted to say that
this is not where he's going to place these ideas. He's got some new places to place things. So the ET element of it is potential. He's going to just distract us from our usual models around this. Look, wow, got to be disappointing. Got to be really annoying to be so highly cleared, and yet nobody really tell you anything. And that's got to be, I don't know. Would you hold a grudge? He says he doesn't hold a grudge later on, but I think that's got to be pretty annoying. Somebody got this scholarship in physics.
We keep hearing this coming up over and over and over again about how people are holding a grudge. And it seems like we've narrowed down who that grudge is against. It's against Sean Kirkpatrick. It's against Gary, the DOD guy that Lou Elizondo complained about in his IG complaint, Gary Reed. It's Susan Goff. Like, there's this idea of sort of retaliating against these people because they wronged them. They're keeping them from spilling the secrets, and it's for what these guys can tell, you'll see it's the farthest thing from the truth. But this idea that they've been wronged and that this information is being kept is really at the forefront of this, and why, so yeah, this
physics, he's so highly cleared, and yet he's the kind of person who people won't really tell anything to, it would seem. And he uses articulation to really win the status, to really win the battle there. And we're going to find later on that in some areas he loses that articulation at a really key point about his story. Let's find out where that happens. Even with this articulation, which is kind of really annoying to be around, very annoying to be around that level of articulation. It lacks downward intonation on it. There's a lot more kind of upward intonation and articulated. So there's a lot of space for this story to grow in. How many, the interviewer asks about these craft, he says, well, quite a number. What does that mean, quite a number? What, more than 10? Less than 5? I mean, 100 or more? I mean, quite a number? I mean, that could be anything. Why would somebody who is so clear and articulate just give us quite a number? So right. No numbers there.
Awesome.
They provided me documents and other proof, but around that we get repetition, we get eye block, we get concern, we get lip compression, and we get a vocal click on that. I don't expect to hear any or see any of those things if documents were provided and other proof. So you're saying the documents were proof of something, but what's the other proof? I mean, tell us. If there's other proof, tell us what the other proof is.
Right, because you're supposed to be a whistleblower.
Listen, I'm already finding him more than slightly annoying, and it's going to get worse. So if I have to duck out of this for a while and stick my head in a bucket of water, I may well have to do that. Let's see what else we got.
I mean, we're 15 minutes into this 2-hour and 38-minute discussion, and this guy, Mark Bowden, is already annoyed with Dave Grusch and how he delivers this information and how vague it is, but how confident he is delivering it. And he sees right through it immediately. The other three take a little while to get sort of to where Mark is, but you'll see. I mean, it's really fascinating. This is a really cool discussion.
Hey, can I give you one data point? One thing to remember is he has an IG complaint, which protects him as a whistleblower, but his sources who disclose this stuff to him are not protected by that IG complaint. So he has to be very careful if he says something that only Mark knew. Guess who? That's one of the things. So I'm going to give him benefit of a doubt there, but yeah, I'm with you.
You had the security. Bill and how did you?
So again, like they go through the replay of what they just covered, and then after the replay, they play the new video that they're about to talk about. So again, just in the interest of time, we're going to skip that part and go straight to their analysis.
Chase, what do you got?
So his regular behavior is already scientifically what I would call super strange. It's potentially some spectrum involvement here, but it's mixed with what I think might be this desire to be larger than life. And this is going to play out in a way that I think you might not expect. And I think there's an element of maybe stagecraft here. And Mark, I would love to hear your take on this. It's almost as if he's performing, which would mean that he's being deceptive, not being deceptive necessarily, but maybe he's acting out some kind of a role. And you see his eyes closed while he's saying the sense of service. And this closed eye talking is most common in Western countries when somebody's patting themselves on a back in like a pretentious manner while they're trying to make it look humble. And the example is always I give that's when you ask your neighbor why they bought some solar panels for their house or an electric car, and they go, oh, well, you know, it's good for the environment. You see the same exact behavior. He uses the left side of his body to talk about negative stuff. And this is spot on throughout the video. And you'll see this again. So this is going to come up later. So he uses this side when he's speaking about something negative. And that'll come up in a minute. There's a weird upward lilt in his voice in just unusual places. It's almost as if he uses the lilt instead of a head nod or something to accentuate stuff in his speech that he thinks is important. I think this is a normal way of being for him, and I bet good money he was in theater and has a natural dramatic flair in his voice. We also heard him use these weird tone shifts when he's discussing.
They straight up are calling him an actor. Straight up. And this is not the last time they mention this. I would not have, being an actor, I did not get the sense that he was acting, but I definitely did not get the sense that he was concerned whatsoever, because again, the information that he's whistleblowing is vague and can't be corroborated and isn't actually classified. But yeah, interesting
information that we know to be true, which is how we try to establish a behavioral baseline. I can imagine him using the same tone in his kitchen, asking somebody if they want a cocktail or a glass of water or something. That he admits the U.S. having intact craft and spacecraft, but the interviewer didn't specify the origin of that craft. NASA has spacecraft that are intact, as I'm aware. So that's a true statement. And when he's asked about the bodies, he's uncomfortable. And he uses a hypothetical scenario to escape the question instead of answering. And if you listen again, he could easily, in his mind, be speaking about recovering any crashed aircraft. So seeing interesting photos and reading interesting reports is not conclusive or even hinting at them being official.
I feel when you really pay attention to the big voices, the Ross Coultharts, the Jeremy Corbells, the George Knapps, whoever the big voices are, they always give you part truth and with the lie. And it's once you pick up on it, you see it really quickly. And it's those broad statements of, yeah, NASA has spacecraft that are intact and that have crashed, and he could be thinking about those things as he's saying the claim of alien craft and spaceship that have crashed. It's really sneaky. But once you again, like, it's putting on the glasses and they live. Once you put on the glasses, you can kind of see through that stuff pretty quickly. And it's nice to see that guys who have no ties to who these players are can see through it immediately. And I think that's what gives them a lot of credibility. Again, I know this is not 100%. This is not an exact science by any means. But so far, the questions they're asking and the things that they're saying and contemplating as David Grusch is giving this testimony is things that we've found in Lou Elizondo and in Sean Cahill and in all of these people that push this narrative, this idea of being a veteran. Therefore, he uses that to garner his respect, and you cannot question it. You can't. Because the second you do, that's when you're anti-veteran or anti-troops. You don't respect the troops. And it's like, no, like, we have a right to ask you questions if you're going to make fantastical claims. And it's just a tactic that they use over and over and over again. And again, like, these are things that I think are important to bring attention to when you're hearing a crazy story that has big claims to it.
And if you're watching this video here with us, you have also seen interesting photos and interesting reports if you spend time on Reddit reading about UFOs. Greg, what do you got?
Yeah, first of all, Chase, statement. Do you have bodies in your closet? No. Yeah, exactly. No. Yes or no is the answer. Not, hey, sometimes when you're stumbling around in the dark, you find a body and you put it in your closet. That's kind of what he said. And look, that is a yes-no question. Now, you can qualify that yes or no and say why you know it. Let me tell you that also in the intelligence business, this is not an intelligence interview. This is a sensational interview that these guys are doing because it's entertaining. Whether it's true or not is another story. We're not going to tell you yet what we think. But look, as you interrogate and somebody says, I heard that from someone else, that's called hearsay, and it's caveated in your reporting. It's been a long time since I've written an intelligence report, but you caveat that hearsay and you say, who told you? When did they tell you? And how did they know? That's an important part of how you report intelligence. I would have asked him, hey, how did you know? I would have gone down that thing. Here's the first really big lip compression to me and fading facts. When he says you're not alone, he goes, yeah. And he really compresses. Let me give you a third reason, because we say compressing your lips is often controlling or containing information. And I'll say often emotion. When people are very emotional, they'll do it. Another time is to suppress a smile. So let's pay attention.
Let's see what he says. Audio interview was done the day before, a backup. So if it sounds rehearsed on the video interview the day after, it's because it totally was rehearsed. Also, go Lou Reviews. Thank you so much. Yeah, okay, so I mean, since you just said that, that's not a bad theory. I like that theory a lot. I also think that maybe the questions were asked and he was given multiple takes to respond to the question. I think that could have also happened because they mentioned the editing of this video as well later on. So, I mean, there are a lot. That was a weird, while we watched it live here on the show, I was commenting on the edits and the sounds that they were using and going back and watching it again. It's like, oh yeah, they were cutting together parts of what he was saying to make it sound more extravagant than it really was. And again, we're going to get to that part of it, but thank you for the donation. I really appreciate it.
Because if I'm afraid I'm going to smile, I may go to control it as well. Let's pay attention to him very closely. I love that you brought up the closed eye talking, Chase, because I had Chase's closed eye talking right here. His amused upper face at the time he's doing that compressed lip, look at his eyes are almost smiling, makes me concerned that the lip compression is more than simply withholding information. Do we have bodies? Yes. That's a yes or no question. Come on. There's a brand new head wobble that we haven't seen yet on 3 axis, not the normal. He's doing pitch roll and yaw with his head as he conditions, believe it or not, fantastic. Let's look for that again. And then at the end, when he says it's true, he does a request for approval. All that feels awfully awkward from what we've seen. I agree with you, Chase. There's somewhat of an act here. But let me also tell you that when you resist interrogation, there's somewhat of an act to who you are, because you're trying not to project enough information for them to get a hold of you. It's kind of a Teflon thing. He said, I've seen enough. I'll leave that one alone because you said exactly what I do. All of us have seen reports and seen photos and read things. There's a lilt at the end as he says that, as he finishes up. When he says, I have seen photos and read reports, there's a lilt. That's a source lead. And if I were interrogating them, I'd say, okay, tell me where. Tell me what you saw. Tell me when. And force him to get to the point where he does the age-old, I can't tell you. That's when you are pushing a guy. Literally, when a guy's cleared, Chase, if I push you on a hot topic, you get to a point you find a way around it. You don't keep answering questions, or you simply say, I can't talk about that. And that's what people do. Now, you get the guy who says, the age-old thing, if I tell you I'd have to kill you. We all know that's BS, but that's just the way people are. The next question would be for me, what did you see? Where did you see it? Look, and why, if you were this important, why didn't you see the real thing instead of pictures? Why?
Right.
Why? I'd poke him. Look, I know that this guy was in the program according to what the vetting has been done by the news network, and these guys are pretty credible. So you'd hope they checked his background. Mark, what do you got?
So, okay, before we go to Mark, I don't think they did their research on Ross Coulthart, because they would have found that Ross Coulthart wrote a book and did an audiobook about UFOs and also hosts a podcast every week about UFOs. And we're going to wait till we get into the Ross Coulthart part of this. Just keep that in mind. Keep that in mind while we're going forward. But I think eventually they catch on to it.
What do you got?
Yeah. Well, not a lot else other than to concur with what you said, because this one's a little bit of a simple one, isn't it? Yes, Chase, absolutely. We got the closed eye talking there. I had it as well. To the idea of that he's acting, there is an act going on. I think you're right. And I think that what I would call the mugging that we're seeing, which is the overemphasis in the face of certain feelings, I think that's about him playing a role, and I think it's a moral role. I think it's virtue signaling. I think he's playing the role of I'm a moral hero in this situation. I think further on we'll find out
that sounds familiar.
Who he believes is, or what he believes is immoral, and what he's on the crusade, the moral crusade against. But look, if he is wanting to live this incredible life of being more moral than everybody else and not living any regret, as he says, he's not really on the edge of his seat around that. I mean, somebody who's taking this moment to go, this is my moment to do the opposite of what most other people have done and do the right thing. He's really laid back and relaxed around that, and a little bit protected as well in a relaxed way around that. It doesn't seem to have the entropy that I would think it should have for somebody who's on that kind of real crusade. Again, to your point, Greg, do we have bodies? The answer should be yes or no. It's really simple. Yeah. Yes, no. But he becomes, Scott, one of your phrases here, he becomes the mayor of Qualifier Town around this. I've never seen so many qualifications as to how you can maneuver around a yes or no answer around this. 2 for 2, still an incredibly annoying individual. Scott, what do you got?
Okay. Yeah, I agree with you. And you're right. He needs a reason to be doing this. And what he said his whole thing on, the base of this whole thing is ethics and morality. That's what he brings up almost at the end of, as often as he's doing, as we're seeing compressed lips, we're seeing stress mouth at the end where his lips are doing that. We hear him talk about ethics and morality. So
and the UFO community gobbles that up. They love that
shit. So if he has been trained to do this, if this is a show, like that's the gut feeling I have. He's on a mission here to say specific things to get specific information out. I think that might be what we're taking a look at here. The questions are basically the same. I mean, it's just, again, so they're aliens, they're people from outer space. What's going on? Where are they from? I got to ask you. He's asking the same questions. It's the same thing over and over with the guy asking questions. He's not getting the answers he wants, or set up the way he wants them. He's getting the idea. Sorry, they'll bug in here. But he's not getting the answer he wants. And he does say there are dead and alive pilots. So he's confirming there's something has been here.
No, he says pilots, just pilots.
Right.
He does not say what kind.
What kind?
Oh, he doesn't say
alien pilots. He doesn't say alien pilots.
Right.
No, I'm saying is dead and alive pilot. There are pilots.
We've got a bunch of them here in the country.
Right. I know. Oh, yeah. I agree with that.
Yeah.
But okay, I think then maybe it's the presentation of it that's making us think it's dead alien pilots. That's the concept.
It's the framework. Yeah. It's the framework.
It's the inference.
Yeah. So, but I see what you're saying.
It's the framework.
You and I are going to agree so hard on this thing, Chase. It's ridiculous because I know where you're going with this. I am too.
You think so?
Oh, I think so. I think so, man.
I've got a good rap.
Oh yeah. Let's see. Then after his little ethics speech there, we hear him go into fading facts. It gets kind of quiet there. So I think this may not be the true reason he's doing it, which I really don't think it is. Which would go back to my wrap up at the end. I'll talk about that. Then again, he's asking about the existence of aliens, and he says we are not alone. So he's confirming that there's something. But he doesn't say they're from space. He says he's already said they're from this, most likely from this other dimension. And a little while we'll hear him contradict that, but I'll wait for that. Okay, we good?
Yeah.
All right.
When I feel do
next breakdown.
We read the IP crime in a public as metaphysical space.
Take a breath there.
All right, Mark, what do you got?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I love that intake of breath there. That's fully out of baseline as he goes into fudging the category of ET into NHI, non-human intelligence. So he's already pushing our categorization. He's a real postmodernist, this guy. He's pushing our categorization so we won't have anything really to hold on to, our usual ideas, which is going to cause him to slip up in the end because he's going to go back to some usual physics idea. I get your point, Scott, that he's apparently studied a bit of physics. Probably could have studied more because pretty rudimentary the way he goes with it, and also tripping over his own fudging of categories there. What I love, and you know me, I love an Australian. I love an Australian interviewer. We're great fans of Liam, I think it is on not Ian, Liam on I think channel 7, I think it is. Anyway, this guy's great as well. I loved it in the first video where he says, "You're kidding." He really calls it on that. He goes, "You're kidding. You're making this up, aren't you?" Well, he's got the look in this video of an adult that's watching an 8-year-old tell stories. There's this real kind of pleasure, slight pleasure on his face as he.
There's a slight pleasure because everything that David Grusch is saying is going to bolster his podcast and his book sales and the belief system that he's hawking on all venues. And this interview for Ross Coulthart, that Australian guy, was cha-ching, 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 cha-ching. This buys another 20 years of ufology, this story. Like, if you thought the Wilson Davis memo was something that's been going on now for God knows how long, and is maybe the dumbest thing ever put out there, now we have this, and people like Ross Coulthart and Lou Elizondo and Jesse Springer and that UFO podcast are always going to come back to this guy and his qualifications, and he's a veteran, and that hero worship. And to hear him say Ross Coulthart, he clearly doesn't, I don't think Mark knows that about Ross Coulthart, that he does UFO stuff on the side for money. And the idea that he came to the conclusion that Ross Coulthart looks like an 8-year-old listening to somebody tell incredible stories, it's an act. It's an act. Both of these guys, I think, are acting. And I would love for them to rewatch this video, but only with their eyes on Ross, and see what they come back with. Because they've already brushed on it a little bit, where he doesn't really ask any follow-up questions. He doesn't really dig. There are moments, but at the end of the day, like, it's a yes or no question. Are there bodies? Like, stop. Whoa. Yes or no? Don't give me this runaround answer. That isn't confirmation of shit.
he listens and listens to this wild story happening, mildly wild story happening, evolve and evolve and evolve, and he kind of, you know, pushes him along, ekes him along, kind of teases him along. 3 for 3, still quite an annoying individual. Greg, what do you got on this one?
Yeah, what I love about this, and when I first heard him ask the question, I was like, why the hell would you ask a conjecture question? And I thought, because what you're doing is allowing this guy to give you his opinion, which he does a lot in this show. But it's brilliant because what happens, and I don't know that the interviewer intentionally did something brilliant, but he does something brilliant. You get this guy now to look at his baseline. My guess is this is him in his living room talking to people. Look at all the hand movement. Look at all the facial expressions. Everything changes. If you look at it, here's the body language of him persuading in his opinion. So let's mark it and see what he does when he does it again. When he's in factual and telling, I'm an intelligence officer on the UAP task force, downward telling. That he's got rambling filler words as he thinks and his hands are doing the work while his brain is doing the work. In fact, at least observationally, blah, 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 before he gets to a word because he's thinking. He's got great congruency of message because his body is talking as his brain is talking. There's a lot of eye accessing as he thinks about what he's saying instead of riveted eye contact and romancer. He's creating an answer. He looks down. It's not internal voice. It's just him creating the right answer to answer the question. And then he draws his head back and keeps his eyes contacting and does that pulling taffy move. Are you with me? Are you with me? Are you with me? As he looks under his brow. When he does that telling of it's just a theory, his brow goes up and that's, do you get me? I would expect, look, if I tomorrow saw a whole bunch of UFOs and had documented evidence, I'd have a hell of a lot of passion around saying, hey guys, here's what I know and here's a fact. And I'd have a lot more passion than this guy does when he's telling us about reading reports and that. But he's got a hell of a lot of passion and a lot of body movement, a lot of body narration, as you would call it, Chase, when he's talking about his opinion. Scott, what do you got?
All right. That big old deep breath before he starts answering, Mark, I agree with you. He's ready for that. I think he said it so many times, he's almost bored with it because he's like, and as he starts talking, because it's the top of it, it's almost like a yawn. So I think that might bore him a little bit. But now he's suggesting the aliens came from another dimension on Earth, and they're alongside us, but we can't see them. You know, and he says this is just a theory. But before he talked about how the math and all those things proved that they were true, and he says as it's a fact. So this is where it's starting to bug me because he's contradicting himself. He's saying it is one thing, and this is a fact. He's saying, this is just a theory. They came from one of these things. But before he said they most likely came from another dimension. So it sounds like I'm just saying this because that's what it sounds like to me. It sounds like this cat's been doing a lot of mushrooms or something, because I remember at Berkeley when these guys would do mushrooms, they'd sit around and talk about other dimensions and stuff like that all the time. That's what they'd get into. And it just, it's just starting.
Mushrooms. That, dude, that has come up so many times, especially with Jeremy Corbell. I think a lot of these guys do mushrooms and expand their mind and get into these deep philosophical thinking and patterns, and they just get lost in it to a point where you've got people now like Chris Lato, saying the craziest shit on his channel. An F-16 fighter pilot. That is something that is just another red flag, something that you hear all the time in these circles about people taking mushrooms. And a lot of these believers love taking mushrooms. Love taking mushrooms. Not that there's anything wrong with it. Go for it. Enjoy yourself. Especially if you live in a state where it's legal. But should you be taken seriously when making wild UFO claims? I don't think so.
Starting to sound a bit odd. His body language really hasn't changed a whole lot in this. His voice tone, volume, and his cadence, everything seems to be the same. He's going right along with that same personality and that lilt in there, almost like a child. Really big facial expressions, a lot of huge mouth and eye movement. So I think he's prepared for all this, and I think it shows. It's showing something's up here. He's got a plan that he's following. I think you guys are right about that. I think there's something up here. Chase, what do you got?
Yeah, there's a tiny flash of anger on his face when he says they provided this proof. And I don't think this is him being angry at the interviewer. I think it's either a feeling of superiority, and he's angry that somebody wouldn't answer that question, or somebody would ask him that, or that he's angry the Inspector General didn't make the proof public yet. And Scott, to kind of roll into this, what you were talking about, as he's describing this, there are a few hallmarks that indicate this is what he truly believes, and he doesn't want to publicly say it. He calls it a well-established fact and gives it credibility. His confidence spikes. His gestures are more animated as he starts to describe this theory. And when he's talking about 4- and 5-dimensional space, his eyes move to the lower right. We typically look down this way when we're thinking about something that's emotional, something we're really passionate about. And this is a theory. I'm not saying this is 100% true. I think that's what he said, or 100% the case. And this shows us he likely believes it is the most likely case. And he's gesturing to his right side to talk about all of this. This is where he uses positive gestures. Over here, he's using his right side. So to sum this up, I'm going to give you a quote from Interstellar, where they are in this 4-dimensional tesseract. And there's this robot named TARS, I think, in the movie, with Matthew McConaughey floating in this black hole. And the robot says to Matthew McConaughey, he says, humans couldn't build this. And McConaughey replies, not yet. I believe David thinks these are humans, but not from here. And if, in fact, he believes this at all, we're going to see more of it in just a second. That's all.
Maybe we're not going down.
So the theory of future humans coming back to manipulate humanity. That's what he thinks Dave Grusch believes. This is like Michael Masters shit. You know, like this is, and he's pissed off. Like the first time that he expresses a tinge of anger is when he's talking about Kirkpatrick basically ignoring him. And the Aero office, like looking over his information, considering what he said, considering the IG complaint, looked into his claims as best they could, and came back with nothing. Nothing. And so therefore they didn't contact him back to follow up on any of his claims because they didn't need to. They didn't need to. And that pissed him off. And I think it pissed off Lou Elizondo. And I'm sure there's a couple of other people in this cabal that have been upset because they feel like they're trying to get, it feels like a bunch of believers, a bunch of genuine UFO alien believers have concocted evidence that is in the public domain and have used it with a little sprinkle of government, you know, eyewitness testimony and videos that were unclassified. And then all of a sudden you've got this huge mess now that we've got to try and sift through and try to figure out the real reason why they're doing this. It's crazy. Wait till you, I mean, again, like, gosh, I don't even know if we're going to be able to do this whole damn video. It's just wild.
Going down the same road.
We'll definitely go over the whole conclusion. But
one of those tape replays.
All right. If you haven't already, please like, share, subscribe.
And so it can prove protect
Ring the
truth.
bell. That way you are notified anytime we go live.
All right, Greg, what do you
In the U.S.
All right, let's go.
So he starts to bump into giving away some intelligence. The minute you start talking about facts about what is in a program, like, for example, kinds of metals, that kind of stuff, you're now disclosing intelligence, because that stuff, if nobody else knows, it's intelligence. But he's not going into statistics. He's not talking about what exactly he saw. He's just using words. He's not using words. He's using language, a lot of language that has no meaning and no content. So as you listen to him, listen for language without content. These words he's using, like isotopic ratios. Okay, what were they? You're going to bring it up. What were they? Give me some numbers. Tell me what that is. Then he says hard facts on the periodic table, or he says high numbers on the periodic table. Even Bob Lazar gave us a number. Come on, man, we can make that up. It's 269, whatever number you want to make up. But he doesn't. He doesn't give us any numbers. And if he's a physicist, he would probably know that number and would remember it. I'm questioning anytime I hear somebody bump up against something and they're using the language of but no content. It makes me uncomfortable, because guess who uses that? Disinformation campaigns use that, because what they do is they blast out language with no content, and then you can't prove or disprove what they say. It's powerful, it's a tool, it's what we do. And now he drops the internal voice in a heavy way. Well, if I'm navigating language, I'm going to drop to an internal voice. I would have said, look, man, what were you briefed on? You tell me exactly what you briefed on, and push him until he said, I can't tell you. Then I said, okay, we'll leave that alone. We'll move to a new one. I could, if you ask me these same questions, I can answer everything this guy has done today. Everything he said, I could answer, because I don't know much about physics except for periodic table has no end. We just haven't found everything on it, to your point about Matthew McConaughey, and not yet. We just don't know what's there. There's no content, a lot of jargon, and then there's a lip compression again at a strange mix of elements. And I think that's because he ran out of words and needed to stop. Here's he's talking about, when he starts talking about normal stuff, when he's talking about progress in that, watch again, no eye contact. He's thinking, his brain is working and he's moving away. But when you ask him a hard question, there's riveted eye contact. That makes me uncomfortable. The interrogator in me goes, my bullshit meter is pegged when you do that. I'm uncomfortable. Then his head goes back, and he's got an RFA, a request for approval, as his brow goes up as he says the word disinformation campaign, and a little distaste in his mouth. You got my attention. Chase, what do you got?
You guys took all the good stuff. Sorry about that Interstellar thing earlier. If you're watching, it just happens to be my favorite movie of all time. And I think that's what he was describing. But when he says certainly not by humans, there's lip compression, and it's different than his normal lip compression, because these muscles right here, the sternocleidomastoid muscles, and there's pre-swallow movement. Right before the camera cuts, you can see that. I think he disagrees with the statement. And whether it's your statement or somebody else's, you can use this technique anywhere when you start seeing things like that, especially the lip compression. And then he says there's a strange mix of elements. He's showing more disagreement on his face here than at any other time in the interview, as far as I could see. There's lip compression with horizontal lip retraction, which is a little bit different. That starts to indicate some fear starting to creep in there. Then the head goes backward, like this head withdrawal. Greg, I think you were talking about that. And there's finally emotional accessing, some down right movement, and his baseline is to move down left. And he's either holding something huge back here, which might be the case, or he disagrees with this pretty strongly, which it tends to look more like from my experience. And in the case that he disagrees with what he's saying, this would point even closer to the possibility that he's acting and doing this as some kind of a performance, but with a script maybe written by somebody else.
Wow.
It's interesting so far, but let's look at the rest to see if we can confirm that or not. But when he says disinformation campaign, it shows contempt a little bit on his face. But one huge thing here is the use of the word sophisticated to describe the disinformation campaign. It's the identical word he used to describe these awesome spacecraft, which he holds in such high regards as to risk his reputation for. The same word. This is not common. When somebody respects something, they do not use the same words to describe something they don't like, almost ever. This is a big deal, and that word being used with disinformation campaign is pretty strange here, and we might see some more of that coming up.
Campaign.
All right, great. Now let's talk about that, because that contempt comes between
just how sophisticated this disinformation campaign is. You're not making this up. It seems like there's a lot of layers to it, and no one has a real answer as to why. And they're muddying the waters on purpose. And yeah, nobody can figure out if it's just a bunch of believers and the perfect storm of people within the system, just took over the conversation and got a whole bunch of smart people to believe that this was actually real. And this is going to blow up in the face of UFO Twitter real soon. Because I have a feeling there's a wall to this ride. This ride is going to go slam at 80 miles per hour into a brick wall that is immovable. You're not going to be able to bust through this wall. We'll see. We'll see.
Sophisticated and misinformation campaign. So there's something up there. Then he goes right into that whole thing about ethics again. That the whole thing he's squatted on about ethics and morality. He goes back to that. So we may be going down the same road, Chase. I think maybe. So again, all this is hearsay. He's not showing it. He hasn't really seen much. He hasn't seen anything. He hasn't said, well, I saw this or I saw that. He says he saw some videos, but he's not seeing any of these, whatever it is.
None of the 5 observables.
Non-human.
And that's another thing. How come we haven't seen any video or anything that has displayed any of the 5 observables? This was such a big deal in 2017. And David Grusch didn't even see the 5 observables. He couldn't even mention those in the things that he's seen.
Beings.
Weird.
He hasn't seen anything. All these people have just come and talked to him about it out of nowhere. Just started telling him about it.
Yeah.
Then he goes back into that, when he goes back into that high-end talk about physics and all that stuff, he's just making it so it's okay. That is a jumbling thing where it sort of mixes stuff up. So then he comes back out. So you will trust what he's saying and believe he's smarter than you, but you just got to trust him on this. I know what that looks like. I see that all the time.
Trust me, bro.
Because someone who thinks they're really smart and they try to throw in all this jargon, like the same thing you were saying earlier, Greg.
Right.
All this stuff going on, but it really doesn't mean much. And like you're saying, Mark, there's not a lot of depth to it, but it sounds like a whole lot's going on there.
Right.
If you're going to be trying to get something across to the masses, you could do that and be okay, because there are a whole lot of people out there that aren't the smartest people in the whole wide world. And then there's that bunch of people up here who are pretty smart, but there's more that aren't than that are. So when it comes to accepting information as a whole, as an entire group, it's more likely to be accepted since there are more people that would accept it in that group than wouldn't accept it.
Right.
I'm trying not to give away my ending. And we're still seeing a lot of micro expressions of fear and anxiety. So this is getting, as horrifically boring as this is excruciating. It's really interesting and fascinating as far as facial expressions go. If you're
they are
into
bored to death with this testimony.
Mark,
That's how uninteresting it is to them.
This is so annoying. So here's my gut instinct on this, because I'd sit day after day in a lot of rooms with analysts or on video with analysts. I listen to a lot of analysts, and the moment you get somebody like this in the room is the moment where you send a message and you go, get this one out. Like, this is literally a waste of our space-time continuum. So it's just an utter waste of time from moment one. I was told, he said, utter hearsay. From moment one, he's just gone, hearsay. All right, get him out the room. No point in this. 0 point in this. Get him out the room. He's expending so much energy on concern, on lip compression, on eye blocks, on pushing forward with the lips, and then, to your point, Chase, tightening out the mouth into a full Wallace and Gromit fear. And I'm not sure it's because exactly that, Chase. I think those are mugged expressions. I think those are acted expressions, and could be due to neurotype. Could be because I think there could be something there in his neurology that means he maybe doesn't know the feelings but has seen them and wants to display them, or could be just a simple act of I need to put a lot of energy into this to show people just how complex and concerning and like incredible, and believe it or not, this is, well, no, but I don't, even if I wanted to believe it, I can't listen to you as an analyst. There is nothing that you're doing right now that would make me give up my time to watch anymore. So I totally understand. If that is his demeanor, how he could be given clearances and nobody want to talk to him. Nobody want to go, oh, you got the clearance, but let's open up the
What a wonderful point. He's got all the clearances. He gave his information, and nobody wants to talk to him after that. They're not impressed. And again, these guys are speaking from a place where they have zero ties to UFO Twitter. They do not know who Ross Coulthard is, obviously. They don't know the players in the game. I would love for them, if anyone from the behavior panel is watching and they liked the tweet for the show. So if anyone from the behavior panel is watching, or if you guys can clip this and send it to them, I would love for you guys to do an analysis of Lou Elizondo in our last interview with him, especially when he calls our co-hosts. He uses an analogy to compare our co-host's mom to a whore. So, and again, this is one of those analysts, military analysts, that came out with videos, and Tom DeLonge from Blink-182 is now admitting on our show basically to sock puppets and manipulating the community. And that was the end of our belief system. And so I would love for them to do an analysis on that, if that's something that would even interest them. Because I think a lot of the red flags that they're picking up with Dave Grusch, they would also pick up with Lou Elizondo. There's no doubt in my mind.
Let's let you behind the real door. I wouldn't let him. Let him
that's
through
right.
my
It was a hooker. Wasn't a whore. He called Rather's mom a hooker. Thank you for the correction, Justin.
door. What a total pedant. What a total waste of time he is. Anyway, that's just my opinion. Let's have another video.
This guy.
What an annoying. You wouldn't last 5 minutes.
One of those tape replays.
They absolutely tore him apart in that segment.
It's U.S. defense spelling. I think we
Roswell part.
The town.
Chase, what do you got?
Concocted that whole.
There is one thing, and pretty much one thing only here, that really shook me the moment I saw it. Most of this clip, behavior that is suggestive here, is just based on his baseline in this context of what I think is probably truth-telling, mostly kind of fluid, weird cadence, which is his baseline, tone, pitch, volume, pretty semi-normal. Still has the normal weird spikes in his tone that might point to acting or being on stage. And it all goes well until the end, the precise moment. And it's at the final, quarter second of this clip when he says the word disinform. He displays the most powerful lip compression here with a really strong chin boss movement. This is this muscle right here. We associate this muscle, which is like a little triangle muscle in the chin. It's called the mentalis, with grief, or quite often shame. And this is well researched by people like Dr. Paul Ekman. I've developed a lot of our modern understanding, and even Paul Ekman based a ton of his work on this Swedish anatomist guy named Carl Herman Hjortshow. So we're seeing some kind of grief or shame here, absolutely. But the tricky part is that we can't see the whole body. Distinguishing between grief and shame is difficult, but I think there is some kind of grief here. Shame, you're a little bit more likely, slightly more likely to see the chin drop when shame happens, as opposed to the grief. That's all I got for this one here. But there's something around that word, disinform. Mark?
Yeah, interesting you mentioned that. We don't confer before this. We don't compare notes. We just get into this. My note here is now he's letting us know what to look out for in a disinformation story.
Right.
He tells us
right.
that you should look out for conflation, concoction, and imagination. Conflation, melding one thing with another. Concoction, just the creation of something out of forms that are already there, mixed together. And then imagination, something out of nowhere. And if you have the analytic skill, you can deduce that it's when disinformation is going on. He says, look, with the analytic skill, you'd be able to see if this were disinformation, and tells us exactly what to look out for. There's one other thing that comes across here, which is just because you are intelligent does not mean that some percentage reach an unfortunate operational conclusion. And I think that is apropos for him. Just because you are, and I've seen it time and time again, just because you're super smart and you're an analyst and you have clearance, and it doesn't mean that you're not going to crash the craft. Doesn't mean that you're not going to reach a conclusion that is not factual or reasonable or what the real conclusion should be. So let's never think that just because this guy, may have awards, may have been given clearances, may well have got scholarships. And, I've met a lot of intelligent people who can't be allowed to cross the road. So, watch out for that. Just because he's smart doesn't mean he can't make horrific mistakes.
Right.
That's all I got on that one.
Excellent point.
Scott,
what
do you got?
And I think that's going to what you're saying, Morgan. He might not be lying. He just fell for the dumbest bullshit in all of ufology. And all of the things that he talks about in that interview are all things that are already publicly known and available. I think he's just a UFO fan. I think Lou Elizondo is a UFO fan. I think they all have ties to Hal Puthoff and Scientology, in a sense, in that the belief comes first, then the facts. Belief first, then facts. And I'm sorry, that's just not the way the real world works.
All right. The expression of fear after yeah, and there's one before some are landed. So, and the fear he's showing is when he goes like that, his lips come out like that. It's a version of fear. We're not seeing the frozen part of it. We're seeing these little micro expressions of fear at the oddest times. And I agree with you, Chase. We're seeing some really interesting fear, anger, grief. There's a whole lot going on here. And I think it's because he may be saying one thing, but he's been told to not to say this because he doesn't feel the thing he's saying. He feels something else. So maybe that's part of it. And then you've got the part where he does know a whole lot about something where somebody got killed or something. But then again, like Greg always says, maybe he's using that as the example so he can refer back to that, but couch it as aliens or whatever it is that crashed or wherever the pilots are from, that type of thing. But then when he talks about the crash, he's got this lilting in his voice, and then he reroutes away from that. He's great at staying away from the answers, from answering the questions he's being asked. And I know I always bring these kind of things up. It comes from when I was in the music business and from engineering tons of records and producing tons of records. I can hear things that pop out at me. And this is what I thought was fascinating. I thought this is where you were going, Chase. But when he says, when he's talking about the crash, and he said the analysis they did was a total hack job. So what happened was they cut when he said what the analysis they did, and then he says it was a total hack job. There's space between there. Something else happened and enough time, enough space to make the emotions change in there. You can hear the edit. You can hear them stick did and it together. They did a good job. I'm not complaining about whoever edited that if you're watching. You did a fantastic job of it. However, you can still hear that edit there. You did cover it with the video, so we couldn't see his mouth or see the change in the video.
Right.
But if you had crossfade those a little bit tighter, it wouldn't have been there. But listen to how the voice sounds normal. Then it goes to an entirely different emotion. It's quieter. The voice is really strong up here. The volume is good. The cadence is cutting right along at a pretty good speed. And then the tone changes and it gets lower. And his delivery is a little softer and his cadence slows down. So in that one sentence there, we're hearing them edit it. What it means, I don't know. It may not mean anything. It may just have been editing for time, but I don't think they should have done that. Or they had a problem, a glitch somewhere in the video or something. But there's that to put in there. So that makes me a little bit suspicious. I don't think that News Nation is in with this guy. I'm just saying the editing there.
I can tell you News Nation is not, but Ross Coulthart is. And I want to know how much production power and who had say-so on the final edit before it went live on News Nation. I know it had to go through News Nation filters, but I'm curious to know what hit the editing floor. And I'm also curious to know who made most of the decisions on the edit and what to keep in versus what to keep out. Because I have a feeling that Ross Coulthart had a big part to do with that presentation. A big part. That was his story. That was his scoop. So, and that was at a different location than the studio, the News Nation studio. So they pre-recorded that. Obviously, right? They edited it. So they had time to work on this, and so much time that they were telling people like Stand for Better and Joe Mergia and Matt Ford and that UFO pod soon. Remember? For 2 weeks they were saying this. So for 2 weeks, this interview was probably close to done or being worked on.
There was a little iffy. Great job, but it's still, you can tell something's up there. Chase, what do you got?
Me.
Or is it Greg? I knew it was one of you guys.
Yeah. So his yes increase a lot here, and his tone has changed. If you hear the way he's talking, his tone has increased dramatically. I'm going to add one more thing. Chase, we saw the same thing. This compression with the chin boss, I don't think it is grief. I think it is containment. Look at his upper face. Look how his upper face looks amused when he's talking, but his lower face doesn't match. Try, everybody sitting there, start smiling and try to control it and watch what happens. You're going to bring up your chin boss. While your chin boss is not something you automatically control, when you're trying to think of ways to control things, watch what happens. And he says it as at a key point, at disinformation. That is an important data point, in my opinion, from everything we've seen to now.
One of those tape replays.
In 1947, an object crashed in the New Mexico area. I saw some small which break the weapon. I see.
Again, if you guys want to watch this whole interview, the link is in the description below.
Every
like I said, if you're watching halfway through, the behavior panel goes over the video once, talks about it, and then when they come back, they play the video they just talked about, followed by the new video they were going to talk about in the next segment. So they play them back to back. So again, we're avoiding that part. We're just going straight to their analysis.
So he says, you can imagine the nuclear radiological risk. Yeah, I can imagine it. I mean, that's all we're doing, isn't it? We're just imagining it. We're just making stuff up. And yeah, I mean, I can imagine it because, you know, I've seen all of those videos about, you know, nuclear stuff going on, and I understand, you know, I went to school, you know, we studied all of that stuff. I've had nuclear material a distance from me, so I understand the risks of that. However, I thought we were talking about interdimensional travel. And so now what you're not explaining to me is how this kind of quantum interdimensional travel does have a nuclear radiological risk. Now it may do it may not, essentially. But you know, if you're so good at the science, just explain it, because you're explaining this new idea with some old ideas that we'd understand, but you're not filling in the gap in between. And he says, you know, it's beyond our comprehension. Well, why are you going for old style analogies if this is beyond our comprehension? Just say it can't be understood. There's no way that I can explain this to you, and I'm not going to do it with any old ideas that we have about physics, because they just won't fit. It just doesn't make any sense to any of that. Now, here's where it gets exciting for me, because there is a vocal click before his central message, which signals to me there's some change, there's something going on here. And that central message is the US government is extremely unethical and immoral. And so for me, this is the central agenda of what he now wants to put forward. The US government is unethical and immoral. That's why I think right at the start of that, he was doing this piece about this virtue signaling of, I'm just doing this for a moral crusade. And the villain of this is the government, US government, some bigger entity, which is the opposite of what I am. Let's see how that story, that idea, trots along. Scott, what do you got on this one?
All right. We're seeing lots of head movement. He doesn't know what really the reason why they're doing it. He throws out a couple of things and says what he may think. And keep in mind, the Department of Defense has okayed everything he said, because he wouldn't say anything he's not supposed to. That hasn't been okayed. He even says that. He says, I can't talk about this because it isn't cleared, those types of things. But everything he's telling us, the Department of Defense has said, yeah, you can say that. It's no big deal. Yeah, you can say whatever, say this about that. Don't say something else. So these things he's telling us aren't really big secrets. It's just stuff that's not out yet. Maybe this is a way to get that stuff out. And again, he ends the whole thing on ethics and being moral. That whole thing. But the thing that bugs me about this, and this goes back to what you're talking about as well, Mark, he says nuclear, not nuclear. Now, it doesn't sound like a big deal. A lot of people say nuclear. Yeah, a lot of people do. We talked about that group here and this group here. He's supposed to be in this group here, which is a whole lot smarter than this group down here. And he says nuclear. I'm from Oak Ridge, Tennessee. That's where they designed the nuclear warheads that we dropped on Japan. When I was in school, if you said nuclear, people would make fun of you, because people from out of town came in and did say nuclear every now and then, and we'd laugh at them and make fun of them. And they, to this day, we still make fun of them when I see them, or when we see them. Excuse me. So that doesn't happen. He shouldn't be saying nuclear. If he's a physicist and he's into nuclear power and understands. My father was a radiologist. He was the head of the radiology department here in Oak Ridge, chief of staff of the hospital. Never once did he say nuclear. Not once. I know George Bush said nuclear. President Bush said nuclear. So what? You don't say that. Another thing he says in a few minutes that's going to bug me squatless is et cetera. EX, cetera, et cetera. If he's this smart, why is he saying this? Why does he say nuclear and et cetera, when it's et cetera? I'm not being a snob about it. I'm just being, if this guy's so smart and he knows all this stuff, why has he talked like that?
That's an interesting sort of thing he picked
up
on.
Mark. Let's hate on him. Greg, what do you got?
Yeah, not as much hate as you have. So he's not fishing. Look, he's asked another conjecture question. He's in his wheelhouse. He does what he.
Greg is the one, I think, giving him the most rope out of the four so far. I think Mark from the start has not been on board. Chase and Scott were in the middle, and they're kind of leaning toward Mark's end. And I think by the end, Greg kind of comes around too.
What he does when he's asked conjecture, he does an eye lock. He starts moving around and talking. Anytime, if I ask you, Chase, what do you think those UFOs were doing over there? Well, hell, nobody knows. Anybody can make up something. And by the way, when you go to DOD to get clearance, Scott, they're not going to tell you everything you can and can't say. They're going to say, do not divulge classified, because you don't know what questions this knucklehead's going to ask. They're going to tell you, don't divulge classified information, boom, 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 boom. And they'll probably tell you some, decorum ways to behave, but they're not going to vet every question that these guys are sending you, most likely. Just depends. He does thumbs up when he's talking about this from folded hands. Joe Navarro says when your hands are steepled and you raise your thumbs, it's confidence. Well, he is confident in this thing because he's just asked a question. We still don't hear a single fact. Not one, not one. We hear more broad terms. A lot of them have suffered physically. Well, like who? How? What kind of physically? They cut their thumbs off? They get radiation burns? They blow up? Something. If the guy has seen all this, I would ask just simple questions, but we don't get those. So we don't really know. This is just conjecture. That's all it is. Chase, what do you got?
Yeah, I agree. And I would tell you, the information is very compartmentalized. So when I first got my clearance, I was probably 21. I got on the computer, and there's a thing inside of the secret part of the internet called Intel Link. And it's like Google for secret stuff. I typed in JFK, aliens. I searched.
Oh, yeah, you'll find it. Yeah.
You can't find, it's not just like you can get access to whatever you want. What I thought that was how it worked. So when he's talking about people being injured, look at when he says or looking at stuff, and he says stuff, there's some genuine, I think, genuine, unrehearsed anger and some confusion on the face here. There's also some genuine, non-rehearsed, I think, emotional eye accessing down and to the right, which also shows he feels something about this. And he also makes the most exaggerated facial expression of this whole interview when he's talking about them physically suffering. So if this is true, maybe he's channeling a memory of, if he's being deceptive, he could be channeling a memory of people getting hurt. If it's not true, this might be a talking point that he's been made to feel emotional about.
I wonder if he's accessing things like Cash Landrum, or I'm forgetting the gentleman's name that had to go through Senator McCain to get his medical records so they can give him an operation from the effects that he suffered at Rendlesham. You know, so he could be thinking about those things. But again, those things are in the public sector. Those are not classified stories.
And when he says ISR probing in here, it's not some alien probe technique. ISR is military speak for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. And I'm extremely familiar with this term. So
John Burroughs,
there's
thank you, Justin.
that usage of sophisticated again when he's talking about this. And he used this to describe positive things first. This unusual usage of the word gives me super weird vibes about what his true feelings about a well-orchestrated disinformation campaign might be. Something is off here. And just to let you know, I've hit maybe the 30,000 hour mark in this field a long time ago. This is something you don't see happen on accident. People don't make the mistake of using the words they powerfully use to describe positive things when they use something negative. I'll just leave it at that. That's all I got.
Chase, you know what I did when I got my first clearance?
What?
I went to the binders.
Binders.
There was no internet.
Yeah.
It's a long time ago.
What'd you find?
I mean, you've been around long enough to remember it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I was, after computers came along, of course, I was on the net, of course. And yeah, you're dead on. People think they're going to go in. You might have the highest clearance level on Earth and go in and try to look up the program he's talking about. Nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing. Because you need access and you need to be read onto the project and all that kind of stuff.
One of those tape replays.
The wind folks would be storing for stream the wind
when he's picking him, he says, they're not. All right. I don't have much, so I'll go first on this one. I've got one thing. When he says, they're not of this world, and he says, most likely, yeah. He's contradicting himself from before. He said, yeah, they're most likely from here in another dimension. But he said they're not from this world. And he says,
which one is it?
Most likely not. So there we are again.
Yeah.
Mark, what do you got?
Yeah, it's the same. So he says before that, absolutely something that we did not make. Absolutely something that we did not make. The interviewer says, not of this world. Well, a good answer would be exactly, not of this world, or yeah, not of this world, or no, not of this world. And he says, most likely, yeah. Well, that's inconclusive, isn't it? So annoying. What an annoying idiot. Anyway,
what an annoying
he
idiot.
won't set his terms. And he won't discuss anything under anybody's terms. So he's annoying because you can't debate him in any way because he will not define anything. And if you define something,
he just
moves outside of that definition.
How familiar does that sound? You cannot debate with him. It's the same thing with Lou. It's the same thing with Ross when you try to ask him questions. I mean, even in that live presentation on News Nation, they had to get him to stop fucking talking. Just shut up. Just stop talking. You're going around in circles, man. You didn't answer the question. Just answer the fucking question. And that is the most frustrating thing. And when you ask them these hard questions, that's it. You never hear from them again. They never come back on your show. They never, ever, ever come back. That's it. You've lost your access. That's why you don't get these questions from anybody who they go on whoever show they go on. They know they've already done the test rounds. Who asks tough questions? And if you don't ask tough questions, you get access to these guys. You get access to Ross. You get access to Lou. You get access to Sean and the, you know, the Skyfort crew. And that's why everyone Lou Elizondo follows are the same people that are harassing NASA scientists. Because God forbid you question them on this stuff. And I love that Mark is right from the start able to see through this bullshit. Love it.
And so you can't pin him down. That's why I would immediately send him out of the room, either to have a think about himself, to go home, or that somebody might put him in a small box for a bit and then bring him back again when he's been made a little more uncomfortable with the situation. The whole thing's pointless because he's just this slippery squid,
right?
Like one of those little alien squids that like,
hey, we like squids slippery, around here.
Eelish squid. Greg, what do you got on this one?
Well, Mark, I think part of the reason you feel like he's a squid is because he's hiding something. Now, what he's hiding, I can't tell you, but I recognize hiding something. You know, I've interrogated a boatload of people in my life. And I would say there's a glass pane. They can appear to be as polite and friendly and helpful as they are. But if you interrogate enough people, you know that feeling when you walk in the room. And it takes you a while to understand you got to break that glass. You got to get through it. You got to figure out how to work.
Explain the glass thing. Explain.
Yeah, and what I mean by glass is you can be sitting across from me and answering every question I ask and apparently helping me and still lying through your teeth simply by avoiding giving details, by using language, by avoiding the ability for me to get a hold of you psychologically. And this guy is doing that with this guy. And what I mean by that is now the interviewer is also not aggressive and poking. For example, when he says, not of this world, well, how the hell do you know that? How do you know that? Just from that video, how do you know that? Somebody tell you that? How do you know? How can you tell? Well, give me the reasons why. But there's none of that. So the guy is doing exactly what I said in the beginning. He has to keep and appease the questioner. He's giving enough information to make the guy feel safe. And he's threshold thinking. Is the guy listening? Is he believing me? Now he's comfortable enough with the guy for the most part that he's comfortable saying things. This guy's not breaking the glass. He's not pushing through and he's not going after him, not chasing him. The guy's a little uncomfortable, meaning our subject is a little uncomfortable because he does a chained elephant. He starts moving around. So we see some of that. When he says we didn't make this, he closes his eyes. That's when I would crawl on him and ask him questions about how do you know that? And he withdraws his lower jaw and his chin, which we usually associate with protecting self and that kind of thing. Well, that may not mean anything. However, it's a deviation from what we've seen here before. And I would like to see more. But that if you've ever been in an interrogation room, you would know exactly what I mean by it feels like there's a glass between you because there's a feeling of that guy is saying everything right, but he's not divulging what he knows. He's not answering questions. And there's a lot of ways to protect that, and there's lots of reasons to protect it. Let me give you one possible reason with him. I said it earlier. While he is protected by an IG whistleblower complaint, the guys that told him this stuff, if he's in fact telling the truth, if Chase told me a bunch of stuff off his program that I'm not read onto, and I divulge that, guess what? I'm protected. Guess who isn't?
Yeah.
So you got to be really careful. Now, the laws may change and things may change over time. I've been out of the system for 15 years, not been playing in the system in 15 years. But Chase, I would venture to say when you left, it was just like that. If you got covered and you're protected by that whistleblower, it's one thing. But all your friends behind the screen who told you that information, now there's a problem for them. So that might be part of the reason why he's I'm going to give them the benefit of a doubt here because I have a very strong opinion, just like the others you do. Chase, what do you got?
So I think if I was running this thing, I would have had them go to a fake commercial break, and coming back from that break, as the interviewer, I'd look at the camera and say, and welcome back. We've got David here, who is a national hero, prepared to finally deliver the actual facts and secrets as a whistleblower. And I would pump his ego up about being a hero and giving out these facts. And then I would beat him over the head with that during the interview very covertly and try to just get more info that way. But I want you to just pay attention to this. He's a whistleblower with inside information who's been involved in the deepest, most secretive access programs in the world. He has information about crafts, beings, materials of the crafts, where the crafts are even kept. Now listen to the video again. He's providing information that anyone, a 12-year-old who has watched YouTube could provide this information. He describes a flying saucer, whatever that thing is, as certainly something that's not a jet and might be some kind of natural phenomenon that's quite strange. He describes the Tic Tac thing as truly anomalous.
Yep.
Something we didn't make, physical, most likely not of this world. This is what anyone off the street would say.
Right.
Just take a minute to process all of that with his knowledge and insider information on this entire program that he's worked for.
He should
allegedly, and you get an answer that sounds like Chat GPT version 2.
Yeah.
One of those tape replays.
I mean, what a great point. What an absolutely wonderful point. And I love that every single video is anomalous. Nothing can be
to the
man-made.
government for profit, and I think that's totally unethical.
Mark, what do you got?
Okay, I've got concern, I've got targeting, I've got a sense of distrust. I get that from a downward, one-sided frown from him, and disgust around the government is not transparent. So there seems to be this building up again of something immoral. The government is not transparent. He himself, I assume, is the opposite. I assume he's very transparent, though we don't seem to have got any information out of him that we couldn't have just got out of, UFO magazine from the 1980s. It was fantastic in the 1980s. I don't want to name the specific companies and government elements. Well, go on. Name them. Be transparent. Why not? Go on.
Right.
Give it a go. Go and tell.
Be actually transparent.
We got this amazing opportunity here.
Right.
But I don't want to. You don't want to. Could you though? Might you? Should you? No, I don't want to. Okay, so either you don't know who they are, or there could be some fear around that. Maybe big breath change there on. Overall, the government has been the custodian of this. So again, he really wants to mark out this government idea. They're responsible. So there seems to be an upset with government. There's a vocal click before. I find that highly unethical. So either, he wants to mark out that moment for us, or maybe it's not true, but there's some problem. Again, with this idea of the unethical, untransparent government. Look, the main thing for me is if you are in this position, think about it for yourself. You're in this position, you have all this information. You could be the person who lets the public know something a little more exact about what might be out there, what technology could be going on. My guess is you would have a sense of wonder and or fear. More so, wonder, fear. What he has continually, for me, is a sense of displeasure with the whole thing. His whole focus for me is on the unpleasantness of him being in this situation of the unethical, untransparent government, and him so ethical and so the opposite, so moral, the opposite of that. That's his focus at the moment. Why isn't his focus on giving us more information, more detail? I don't get it. It's all his motivation for me is all in the wrong place for this. Chase, what do you got on this one?
I think he means what he says here. But I say this knowing that this entire clip is banal, vague, and doesn't specifically mention anything except for a giant craft somebody else saw. Yeah. And there's that withholding lip compression right after he says, when I interview people. He never mentions anything specific about the crafts or if the government has them. He lets you believe that that's what he's talking about. But he isn't at all. He could be talking about captured craft from enemy forces and allowing them to be studied by these big aerospace companies, which he may or may not be talking about, which I can't mention, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin. This clip is about 100% honest, but still withholding. But it's honest with nothing being said in the second half of this whatsoever. If you're a whistleblower, you should be able to name some names. And something's really off in his desire to protect these companies and the government and all this. He showed up to a whistleblowing party, and I think he left his whistle in the car.
Yeah.
Greg?
Yeah, I think he may have some restriction to protect him. I think he may have some restriction by DOD on what he is allowed to divulge. That may be the case. That would be a thing that say, do not mention X, Y, or Z. Name a company, for example. It might be his opinion. Who knows? But I agree with you. Here's the crux of everything going on, I think, because this is the most persuasive body language, I guess is the best word I'd have, not because he's trying to, but because something changes. There is one place where, and let me run down that list and I'll go back to it. It's the first time we see him move in the chair. That's a big deal because he hasn't moved in the chair till now. Well, maybe he's feeling fidgety, but some of those other questions should have made him fidgety. It's also the first time we hear the question right after he says something. First time. That's interesting. He has hard eye contact even when he's moving his head around, and he's got hard eye contact. The only time he breaks eye contact is down left. And I don't think it's for internal voice. I think it's just a quick eye break and then come back. Because listen to that change in tone of his voice, in the pitch of his voice when he breaks eye contact. Something's up. Fight or flight causes our voices to get tighter, our vocal cords to get more restrained, and that causes us to make a different sound. I think it recruxes something. And then he goes into the whole ethically thing, and then he puts his head down a bit, and then he goes certain private corporate elements. Did he run into somebody and that's why he's doing a whistleblower? We don't know, but there's a whole lot more emphasis in that sentence than anything we've heard to now. So I think we're at the crux of something big here. And then you get that unethical, another normal lip compression for him. Is that containing emotion? What is it? So the last thing I'd say is if he talked about videos he had seen, I said, what kind of videos? What'd you see? What made you believe this? Why? How do you know this? Also would ask, how do you know about these certain private corporate elements? But that's not where we're at. This is a half entertainment, half information kind of an interview. Scott, what do you got?
All right. When he says perspective, we see an expression of anger on the if of perspective. So I think we're seeing so much anger in here. There's something hiding back there. There's something behind all this, and a lot of it is anger. When he says there are more concerning videos that left me with a lot of questions. Fading facts at the end there. Again, like Mark was saying, he's not, or maybe it was you, Chase, that said he hasn't seen anything.
Right.
He has no proof of anything. It's things people have told him, those kind of things. But he does say he's seen video that makes it that it's more concerning for him. But that's where the facts fade on that. So I don't think he's very.
He didn't say where. It could have been video on Reddit.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Exactly.
And when he starts talking about how big these things are, how large this thing was, then he starts adapting with his hands and his feet and his legs. He starts moving around a lot. So I think that bothers him now. Of course, it's something, again, he didn't see. That's something he's been told. And as he delivers all this, still he looks like a little kid. His eyes are all wide, his head's moving around, his mouth gets real big and real small. It's just these odd, overplayed movements. It looks like acting. In a way, it looks like he's
again. They keep going back to
it looks like he's
an actor,
and
he's acting. Why is he acting?
That bothers me, etc. Instead of etc. It's just this guy just bugs me.
One of those tape replays.
There are many videos that are totally fair to release through a declassification.
204 that are officially bugged by David Grusch. They find him annoying.
Originally, expressed some called me. If he does the truth, years.
This is where it starts to get into.
Yeah, so always the easiest cop out for any of us who work in the intelligence field is to say, hey, I can't tell you that's classified. That's an easy way to get it out. So you're always going to do that. And then he goes, they are out in the cold. He's talking about presidents, heads of this whole thing. However, guys, you always know I care about body language a little bit. I care about why more than body language altogether. He divulges the why right here to me. This is the why. We're going to see it clearly in his body language as he moves in. When he says, after he says they're out in the cold, he raises his brow. Of course they are. The president's out in the cold. You've been read onto everything on earth. However, listen to the change in his pitch and his tone.
President
and he goes
doesn't
to
know,
a
but Dave Grusch
quicker
knows.
speech when he's talking about this doctor who is the head of this whole department. When he says he has my phone number. That's the way one of my ex-girlfriends would say it.
Right.
You know, she would have said, he's got my phone number, and been very quick and very aggressive. That sounds bitter. That sounds upset. If you're Greg and you're sitting across from this guy, now we go to micro interview. And by micro interview, I mean, I go along until you do something that's an anomaly, and then I focus on that. And I go along until I get to something that's an anomaly, and I focus on that. And you crawl up somebody pretty quickly doing it that way. Listen to that cadence increase. And then he goes to that persuasive head bob thing, that triaxial head bob thing he did before. And now that permanent smile he's had this entire time disappears. The sides of his mouth are drawn and his chin is thrust forward. That's interesting. There is everything I needed to know. There's a problem here. We got a problem. This guy's got a problem about how he's been treated somewhere. I don't care what he says about being disgruntled. He's got a problem. And then given the opportunity to accuse, he doesn't accuse. No accusation. Interesting. Scott, what do you got?
Explain being read in.
Yeah, so read in, all that means is I got a project, or I've got it can be massive. It can be a big area of focus.
Call me back.
Or it can be a project. You have to be read on is what I would have said in my day. Chase, I don't know what they're saying in your day, but read on is typically what we said. So you
this
get
is the same thing Gary Nolan has said.
Chase said it earlier.
I
want to know about JFK. Well, you're on that project.
Now Grusch.
If you're not, there's no need for you to know that, so we're not going to read you on.
Things that have been said in Liberation Times by Sean Cahill.
You get up to like you get up to top secret and SCI access. You got to be read into that. So it depends on where you're at and which program you're working on. You have to have a need to know. Even Chase and I could be working in two different rooms right next to each other on things that have nothing to do with each other, and we don't talk about that when we come out of the room. It's just that contained, it's compartmentalized, to Chase's point, so that it doesn't get to be easy to broadcast everything we know about situations. So yeah, I think it's a good.
Okay,
Scott.
Here again, mine's going to be quick because it's so, but he doesn't answer any of the questions he's asked. He's asked three times. He's asked three questions that he doesn't answer one of them. Like, for example, last one, he says, do you think the American people are being lied to? And he says, well, they've been lied to over and over for years, and I hope it stops.
Yeah.
It's a yes or no answer.
Right.
You know what? I'm just over this cat. Chase, what do you got?
So y'all touched on this. One indicator that I think I would put on the extremely reliable list, and keep in mind, baseline and context play a major role in whether this can be factored in or not. But this is someone's level of comfort with calling somebody else a liar.
Right. From
politicians to criminals and maybe intelligence detainees. When somebody's lacking the willingness to call somebody else's story a lie, it's severely concerning for me. And this is due to what I call a fear of reciprocal accusation. If they're worried about their own deception, they'll be less likely to call somebody else a liar for fear of the accusations and the attention that it can bring onto their story.
Right.
There's an exception here, though, in this clip we just watched. If we look at the willingness to call someone a liar on a spectrum here, Grusch, or this guy here, David, I think, gets pretty close. He expresses genuine disappointment in not being followed up with this vocal click that I have no doubt Mark is about to tell you all about. And he expresses hope that the truth will come out, then openly calls it crazy if the same conclusion isn't reached if they look at the same stuff. And on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd put him on almost a 7 here, as in he's getting close enough to calling Dr. Kirkpatrick a liar. So in essence, this is most likely some kind of honest behavior here, even though we're not getting answers. There's a ton of non-answer statements that don't answer the direct question whatsoever. Mark, what do you got?
Yeah, so look, it's only reiterating, exactly what's been said. But yes would be a good answer to, do you think they've been lied to? The US people, do you think they've been lied to? Yes or no? And it's really specific around this. But what he does is open it out to a generalization of, they've been lied to over many, many occasions, lied to over years, and I'm hoping these lies will stop. So he generalizes on this to put forward the idea of a culture of distrust for the US government. Well, so what's that agenda about? It may well be true, but why are you showing up right now to tell us that, to get that message across? And Greg, to your point, he could have called me. He has my phone number. Yeah. What I have here is slighted lover. Slighted lover.
Yeah.
Because it is. It's just like, hang on. Like, he's being ghosted. It's like, it has absolutely that nuance to it
it's sound like, again, parts of this sound like a bunch of guys who believe UFOs are real. They've seen the Reddit stuff. They've talked to Puthoff. They've heard about Skinwalker Ranch. They're buddies with Jacques Vallée. All of these guys, and they believe all of this shit, and they just happen to have special classified access, and they just happen to be within high levels of the government to a point where one of them has White House access. And they're telling these stories, going around their superiors, because they've already presented it to Gary Reed. They've already presented it to Dr. Kirkpatrick. And both of them are going, yeah, this is bullshit. I'm not going to pass this on to any general or anybody above us because this is a waste of their time. And they took that as a slight. They took it personally. And they are making a big deal about it. Such a big deal that they're bringing in the IG. And they're telling people that they've been harassed and ostracized. And they're supposed to be protected whistleblowers, even though they're not whistleblowing a fucking thing. I mean, there's elements of this, and again, it's sophisticated disinformation. Elements of this seem so fucking dumb. So dumb. And then, as we'll hear them say here in a little bit, then there's other elements of this where it's just like, yeah, that's fucking scary. Like, if they're going to that extent. And why? What's the motivation? That's the whole thing. It's like, shit, well, I don't think we'll ever get an answer to this question. It's why? To what purpose?
Of scornfulness around it and slight. And so, you know, it's no surprise both of us have picked up on that. So what could that be about if we're correct? What were his expectations of the love and respect and the power that he would receive? What's his expectations, and how has that expectation been undercut? That, for me, is really interesting, because the tonality of the scorned and slighted lover there is absolutely palpable. And I think now we're starting to get onto what this really might be about. I mean, there could be a number of layers on this, but it feels to me that some of the layers are really not about craft from other dimensions, that there's some way more human layers about the very basics of feeling respected and loved and having, a place and having some status. There.
It's a public office spat. From the surface level.
I'm done. Let's have another.
One of those tape
Prove the originally expressed been
Say it again anytime.
Okay, Greg, what do you got?
Yeah, so with this guy, I'm just going to say it again. Anytime he's talking about opinion, he's free-flowing. Everything's moving along smoothly. But the minute it gets to facts, he's a desert. Nothing. There's nothing. That long yeah is his barrier, his separator, so it gives him time to move into the next thing. I do it all the time. I'll say, yeah, a bump. And it frames what I'm about to say. In his case, it's giving him time to think. He goes back to that same style we've seen, congruent messaging, eye accessing to think of what he should say. Not really internal voice this time. Rolls his head as he thinks. Then he talks about instances. There's no pressure at all when he starts talking about certain techniques. Look, if there's certain techniques to take down UFOs, why don't you mention them? Well, maybe that's classified. Well, maybe you say that. But certain techniques, there's no pressure, no ridicule, no approaches, nothing to go after it. So we can't really say whether he knows something or not. Then he says this whole thing, while I can't get into specifics, I was briefed by a few individuals on. Then we see that lip compression that I think is squelching a smile, in my opinion. I don't see this as credible because he's so much garbage he's covering
now
up.
Greg is
all we need is one
it's
fact to feel good about this interview.
Just one fact.
I think all four of us would feel much better if we had one fact. Like, there are 9 UFOs.
Yeah.
One
Just
fact.
one
Lazar gave us
fact.
facts.
Just
whether facts or
one.
not, it's another story. That's the
They're
jury's
looking
out.
for just
I don't think with
one.
us it is, but with other people. But he had a number and he told us what they look like. This guy's not told us anything.
Shit.
Mark, what do you got?
Yeah, here's what I'd like you to do is in your imagination, or if you have, some kind of AI machine, dress this guy up as like a surfer dude. Okay. and now work out how credible is what he's saying. Because it's very easy to look at this and hear what he's saying. And there he is with the pressed shirt and the khaki pants on and, the classic analyst look. And you go, but hang on, though, he had clearance and he seems intelligent. But if you dress him up as a surfer dude or that smash, smash, smash guy and listen to what he's saying, you'll go, this is nuts. Nonsense.
Bullshit.
This is
bonkers nonsense. There is not one thing in there that has any level of credibility to it. But
zero.
Stick a press shirt on somebody, some khaki pants, and say, hey, they had clearance. And now suddenly we're meant to pay attention. Well, here's what strikes me about the body language. I did pick up some body language because it got tedious after a while. And I picked up the furniture as well. He's sitting in something like a Seska Brea chair, classic bar house from the 1920s, 1930s. Now, why would furniture be important? Why should you, as somebody who understands body language, why should you understand furniture? Well, we spend a lot of time around furniture, and knowing how different pieces of furniture act is kind of useful. This is a Seska Brea chair. Okay, this is classic. This is from the 1960s edition of it. You see, it's got bent tubular steel on it, which means to rock backwards and forwards in it as he's doing, and I want you to watch that, takes a lot of energy. Takes a lot of energy. In order for me to move that bent piping backwards and forwards, it's a lot of effort. There is something going on in him right now. There's some pent up energy in his core right now that means he can move that chair backwards and forwards. I think that's very, very interesting. Were people killed by a non-human intelligence? That seems to be the case at one point, yeah. Well, I mean, that seems to be the case. Like it is or it isn't the case. Like it is or it isn't at one point. Well, so there are points where it didn't happen. Like it's an on and off. It's on or off. You're either dead or you're not dead. Okay, there's no in between. I understand the quantum mechanics you're trying to do around moving interdimensionally, but it doesn't work in our dimension. Okay, a human being gets dead or not dead. There is no in between state on that one.
Right.
Oh, still super annoying. Greg, what do you got on this one? Oh, Chase.
Yeah. And in the comments, just let us know if you think that Mark just made up the name of that chair design. All right. The first part of this is him just explaining open source, well-known information in an even more vague, ambiguous, and what I would maybe call informationless way.
Right.
And at this mention of there's attempts to bring down the craft, he says there have been instances. He doesn't say of what. Anyone on planet Earth, including a 1-month-old baby, can say there have been instances. And if you're 4 years old, you can say the other thing he says. There are certain techniques, because he doesn't tell you what kind. And this is so vague, he could be talking about an episode of Hell's Kitchen with Gordon Ramsay. And when they're bringing up malevolent events, there are some strange facial expressions that form on his face here, but they look like acting. This tight-lipped, withholding expression and maybe a little horizontal stretching.
Why is this guy acting?
When he says at the beginning or at the end there, that seems to be the case at one point. Not that seems to be the case. He said that seems to be the case at one point. He's well-spoken. So I think this was not an accidental slip-up of language. This entire interview was rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed, probably for months on end. Wow. I think he's thinking of a single incident that he's been maybe told about by these individuals he references, or one that he's been told to memorize in case it comes up. That's all I got.
One of those tape replays.
And it's very possible for a Ross Coulthart to have organized with a Dave Grusch because they have enough mutual friends to have set up that interview and practiced it, or gave him the questions to practice answering, because he knew what questions were coming and he rehearsed them over and over and over, maybe for months before this interview actually happened, knowing that this was going to come, knowing that Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal were working on something and they were pitching it to the Post, the Washington Post, the New York Times, and everyone said no except for the debrief. The debrief was like, hell yeah, we'll pick that up. We don't give a shit about the fact that none of this is factual. We don't care. We'll print it. We'll run with it. And we'll turn off the monetization in order to look like we're doing a good thing. But really, we don't give a shit. Like, we just put our name out there in every single news media publication across the world for free. They just got the best advertisement in the world by sharing this story. Man, it is absolutely wild. Absolutely wild that these guys are coming to the conclusion, or not the conclusion, but they get a good sense that Dave Grusch is acting. He's acting. This is rehearsed. The questions are
Coming
good.
All right, Mark, what do you got?
Just one thing on this. White collar crime was committed. That's, I mean, that, I think, you know, we may be getting something factual there. I mean, not that that's anything new. So just so everybody knows, white collar crime does get committed. It's one of the most prevalent crimes, in fact. It doesn't get prosecuted a lot, really hard to track down. You know, it takes a lot of people to prosecute. So white collar crime was committed. So we've managed to get down to something a little more tangible. Now, he won't, he's not saying the names of anybody, but...
Leslie Kean also used to be part of Stephen Greer's staff. She used to be part of Stephen Greer's team and staff in the 90s. She was part of that whole thing.
Was really un-American things, and he doesn't want to repeat them right now. So it's white-collar crime. It's very un-American. I mean, I would assume, just how prevalent white-collar crime is, that a lot of it is happening in America. And, you know, that's just the way it is. That's just the nature of crime. So he is a whistleblower. He has lost his whistle. I have the whistle here, but I want to show you, don't worry, Scott, it's going to be okay. But Scott has been protecting his ears for years, and now he's going, now I'm going to lose them on the behavior panel. No, because this is the extent of his whistleblowing. That's it. Yeah. That is the whistle that's getting blown on this one. Whistle. White collar crime has occurred. There, you heard it. You heard it here first. Chase, what revelations do you have on this one?
Well, I'm sure Greg's excited that a fact came out. But this video here is essentially just taking an article off of Reddit, then running it through ChatGPT and telling ChatGPT to make it vague and strip all detail from it. That's all I got. Scott?
Wow.
All right.
They're sick of
it.
The
first question out of the gate, I'm always talking about the confirmation nod, or because no, I didn't do it, but they're confirming no, they didn't do it. This is the classic here. This is the one Dr. Ekman talks about all the time. It's like, as the question's coming out, he knows what the question is. It finally dawns on him. He starts shaking his head yes. And as he answers, he's shaking his head yes. It's not just the one confirmation nod. It's just like, yeah, it starts that small little nod like that. So that right there, I think for me anyway, is the most exciting thing I've seen in the last 4 videos. And that is definitely a yes nod. So he's saying yes to that question. And at the second question, he has to think about the answer a little bit, and then again he nods several times while he's thinking about it. So that again is a yes. And we're seeing the lip compression. That lets us know that this subject is a no-no, and he's got to watch what he says about that. But I agree with you, Chase. This guy has rehearsed this. This is nothing, and this is new for him. This is like, we recognize this from prepping witnesses and all those questions that come in from 90 million different angles. And why would you ask that? Because you never know. So he's ready. I think you're right. Did this for months because he's ready for anything, and he cannot answer anything by answering it.
Right.
Fascinating. It's fascinating. Greg, what do you got?
Yeah, I know watching him is interesting because he evades very effectively. Yeah. When he says, that's what I want to know as well. Well, hold on. I thought you were coming to tell us what's going on.
Right.
Then he does something that's really one hell of a stretch, but he grabs something factual and concrete and wraps himself in it as this is proof. It's proof that Russia and the U.S. had agreed not to launch a nuclear missile until they verified whether what was going on was an attack or not. Is proof there were UFOs. No, that would be like me saying, Mark, hey, man, late tonight, I'm going out back and do some work in the yard. Don't shoot over there just in case. Yeah. That's kind of what we're talking about. That's very sensible. Yeah, really, really logical to me. However, it must have been UFOs. It must have been something, because we all know when we say UFO, it doesn't mean things. It means unexplained. That's all it means. Unexplained things that show up on radar. And there's been plenty of that occur in the past. We almost had nuclear war, I understand, like more than one time because of radar issues where we got anomalous pictures. Right. So look, that's a stretch for my taste. The only fact, and it's a hell of a stretch. And then when he says it's been used, that's been used from what I understand, there's a lilt in his voice at the end because he doesn't know either. The only time we see him starting to really use body language and express himself again is when he pontificates and he's given the opportunity to talk about what he thinks is true. There's a big difference. I don't see any substantive evidence. I would just say, like, what substantive evidence have you seen? What? You got some now. You brought it up. What substantive evidence do you have? I didn't see any. And then that last hard claim, as he gets to it, he does the squelch of the smile again, I think. So I've lost interest with you, Mark.
That's it. All four of them have now turned.
Next few, so people can see what he has to say about
all four of them are done with this guy. They're just done with this guy. And that says a lot. Like, I mean, genuinely, like, especially from Greg. I mean, like, Greg and Chase in particular have been within the government. They know how intelligence works. They've had the same clearances, it sounds like, in some cases. And all of them, again, no ties to the UFO story. I bet they don't know the ins and outs of the 2017 claims and TTSA versus ALSAP versus ATIP versus UAPTF. I guarantee you these guys do not know the ins and outs of all of those things that have been happening that have built up and led to this interview. And even that, to me, again, is the most impressive part, that they are able to sift through the bullshit so quickly. And it just shows what kind of wool I had over my eyes and how my experience fed into a belief system that would make me rationalize and hero worship a person like Dave Grusch. If this guy had come out a year and a half earlier, we would have been huge champions of Dave Grusch on this channel. We would have defended him until the cows come home. And here we are a year and a half later, and we could see right through it. We watched it live here on my show. I think I'm the only show that hasn't had that episode completely banned because I didn't monetize it and we didn't do it. I was doing commentary over the entire interview. But we were saying a lot of the same things that these four guys are saying when we were watching that interview. None of this stuff is classified. There are no facts in what he's saying. And Ross Coulthard, I mean, I find it incredibly interesting that all four of these guys think that he's acting and he's rehearsed this for 6 months, they said. I mean, he's ready for any questions that are thrown at him when it comes to this topic. And he's going to answer you without answering you.
When he's asked, is it a lie? That's usually a good indicator for me that I'm going to dig a little closer. It doesn't mean it's always true that a person is lying when they laugh when you ask, but it's usually an indicator that you need to pay attention, especially when they haven't laughed when you ask hard questions before. This time the compression looks unhappy. It doesn't look like just a control.
Thank you, geez Louise.
There's a little grief in there. he wouldn't know. Let's be honest. He's asked, "Are you being fed misinformation?" That's how.
Again, look, this is Mishka Kozlovsky. I understand that this is not science. This is not 100% at all, right? But I'd say, considering the things that we've seen on this channel in the last 3 years, these guys have absolutely nailed everything that we have suspected on this show in one interview. In one interview, they were able to catch on all of the things that we theorized and thought about. We're like, well, what if? And these guys in one video have been able to see through all of this and put out theories that are very similar to people that have gotten close to this story and the players particularly of this story. John Greenwald, myself, Stephen Greenstreet, Keith Clore, like all of the people that are out there that have a strong anti-opinion of this story are all people that were really close to the sources. And when these guys, again, who have zero ties to any of this community, are able to parse these insane claims and really, again, strip them down to the absolute bone, it's not science, but they're pretty fucking right on the money. They're pretty right on the money. And even if they're 100% wrong, the questions that they're asking and that they're proposing and the things that they're disappointed in are all valid. So you can say this is pseudoscience, and maybe it is, but it's a hell of a lot better than listening to Jeremy Corbell or Ross Coulthart break down what's actually happened in this interview, or in News Nation for that matter. These four guys have done a better job than anyone else, as far as I'm concerned, breaking down the claims of Dave Grusch. We've already had multiple credible media outlets destroy this story and call it bullshit. This is the first panel of people that are in intelligence, have worked for intelligence, and are giving you their opinion on what they're hearing from someone in the intelligence community and adding some clarity and levity as to what this job means, what he could be talking about versus what he's referencing. I think they did a pretty damn killer job. And if you're watching this going, no, these questions aren't good, this is pseudoscience, this doesn't count, then yeah, you're probably caught in a heavy belief system where no matter what's thrown at you, you're going to deflect it. No matter what, you're going to jump through hoops backwards to try and make it make sense in your mind. I was there too. So I'm not judging, but yeah, you're caught in your own belief system. And if you're here, hopefully we can shake you out of it. But I mean, I doubt it. I doubt it. You know, you're going to have to come to that road and that conclusion on your own, and your own experiences, I'm sure, will lead you there eventually. But I can tell you, we're not going to get alien bodies. We're not going to get the 5 observables. And if we do get anything close to a craft that displays the 5 observables, be careful, because it could be ours. It could be the United States technology, and this whole thing is just a smokescreen to confuse people what's alien versus what's our tech. And it's a perfect smokescreen for something like that. I'm just saying, be careful. Be careful if an amazing UFO video comes out. Wait until all the facts are in, because there's going to be a lot of people screaming aliens, just like I have a feeling it's going to be the same people that were screaming David Grusch's testimony was it. Disclosure is here. That was soon. That was their big win this year. And I have a feeling there's going to be a book, and we're going to get a congressional hearing at some point here soon. But if you look at it from a rational perspective, I think you'll see the exact same things I'm seeing and the exact same things these guys are seeing.
That's how misinformation works, is you don't know you're being fed it, so you become a patsy and you become part of it. That's why there's so many cutaways and nothing concrete for you to be involved with. And he just described exactly how disinformation would work. If Chase is a disgruntled guy, a guy I don't trust, I feed him all kinds of bullshit so that when he leaves, he's going, yeah, and yeah, and yeah.
Again, the difference between me, Mashika, with all due respect, is I was close to the source. I was right there. They were on my show. We talked to all of these people. I've had a much different experience with Lou Elizondo than you have. And I think when the dust settles, you're going to see I was right. And so far, it seems to be that way because there's no proof. There's zero proof from anyone that any of this is real. Zero.
That's how it works. And then there's that compression with the chin engaged again. That looks like control of a smile. It's just me, maybe. Chase, you saw the same thing earlier. I hope you saw it in this one. Chase, what do you got?
Yeah, I did. And
I'm not just a believer. I was an experiencer. That's the biggest difference here also, is my experience or my memory of it shaped my belief system. So for me to go against this takes a lot. I had to see a lot. I had to experience a lot to get to this opinion that I'm at right now. Nothing in my body wants to have this opinion. I want it to be real. I want that memory that I have in my brain to be accurate. But I know it's not. That's just being rational.
There's one incredibly unusual thing here that we see in all the other videos is lip compression all throughout this video at precise moments where we would reasonably expect to see some information withheld by a person who's being told to withhold information by the government. But right here, we see the withholding come immediately after he denies having a mental illness. And if you look, a very small smile after that lip compression. And the interviewer says, and this is not a lie, asking him, this is the most expressive we see his legs and lower body in the entire interview. This could boil down to the sudden increase in the intensity of questioning, maybe. He also eye blocks during his initial denial here. So his eyes closed during his initial denial. He uses emotional accessing here, downright movement, in the conversation where we would expect a truthful person to access emotional states or recall emotional states.
There are no payrolls. Let's be 100% clear, Tony. Nobody's on a payroll. These are all belief systems and people that are really caught up in their belief systems, whether they're non-believers or believers. And, you know, you make a good point, William. Like, I believe. Like, at my core, whether I want to admit it or not, I believe. But now I need proof. And so far, I haven't seen it. And my belief and my experience is not proof. Period. And neither is yours. Period. We need proof. And David Grusch has not provided any of it.
And I think, I don't know, filing an inspector general complaint is an emotional thing in the military. I don't care who you are. So I'll give him the benefit of doubt there. And when he's describing people telling him these extremely specific details, he says it in this clip. This is when he's the most honest here in this clip, I think. And I think he truly did hear a lot from someone, whether it was some dude he met on 4chan or Twitter who FaceTimed with him, or a government official. He doesn't say, but he says they gave him a lot of information. So it was probably a human involved in this. Scott, what do you got?
All right. This is the most anger we've seen so far because he's touching on his mental stability. I think that got on his last nerve because his volume goes up, his tone gets a little bit stronger, his cadence speeds up a little bit. Everything goes up right there. So this bothers him. That makes him not angry, but you can see that hint of anger on him. And then when he talks about the personal and professional risk, where's that?
Right.
We already know that what he's saying has been okayed by the DOD to say. What's he risking here? So they're going to kill him. They're going to say, yeah, dude, you can go say that. Everybody knows it. And they're going to kill him for that. They're going to cut him off so he can't work anymore. This is, he has no evidence of anything. So why would they do that in the first place? Something's up here. Mark, what do you got?
So the questioning does get more intense and personal. But he's the person who brings up the idea of disgruntled employee, which I find interesting, saying I'm not one of those. It isn't immediate. We go down the possible mental health ideas. It wouldn't be where I'd jump to straight to, well, are you a disgruntled employee? He goes there. I find that interesting. He says he filed a complaint. Well, then that's disgruntled. He's not gruntled about it. He's disgruntled about it. So that seems now. I may not be hearing this properly. I know he filed a complaint of reprisal. That's what the documents say. I didn't hear him say IG complaint. Did either of you hear him say IG? Because I can't work out what he's saying before complaint. I can't make out what he says. I don't think it was IG. I don't think he says complaint of reprisal. I can't tell what it is. Now, that I can't tell what it is means there's a little bit of, Scott, for me, fading fact in that moment, because I've heard everything else he says other than exactly what he's saying kind of complaint it is. It might be some terminology that I just can't get, but even so, I'm pretty good at English, and so far he's been pretty good at getting information out, and I can't hear exactly what it is. So that alone, whether it might even be IG, and I haven't managed to hear it, that alone, that I can't tell the letters I and G, mean there's something about this complaint, because he brings it up and says, I'm not disgruntled anyway. Right. Made a complaint. What type of complaint? We can't quite hear that, apparently. So, interesting, he's being repped by a former Inspector General, auditor of the intelligence, in order to make this complaint. That's important because it's going to come up in a moment. I think he's going to slightly, what words does he use? What did he say? If it's a disinformation campaign, he said, oh yeah, look out for conflation. He said, look out for conflation. I think he's about to conflate two auditor generals, to inspector generals, the auditors. He's
conflating.
I think coming up. Let's see.
Let's see if I'm correct.
One of those tape replays.
Bigger deal than what it is.
History. Was what you and very easy. The means that describe the all documents like a scene of a lot, but it was the truth. This and that embedded on it. Importantly, complex subject incredible.
Chase, what do you got?
Here it is again. We're seeing the word sophisticated disinformation again. And while I think his disdain for the disinformation about this topic is real, it seems he's got a great deal of unusual respect, maybe, for the process of creating some kind of sophisticated disinformation campaign. It's just unusual to see. When he's talking about the steps of the disinformation process, he uses his left side, which throughout the interview, he illustrates positive things over there on his left side, which I found pretty interesting as well. And he says, I'm not sure what the report is, but I'm glad it's being looked into. I think there's one point where he says credible with a huge question mark at the end here. And this is in his baseline. He's somehow become a person who uses uptalk, but also uses this weird upward inflection to emphasize things that he thinks are important. So take that with a grain of salt. We have an atypical baseline on this person here. Greg, what do you got?
Yeah, he brings up one thing. He does a resume statement to use something you always say, Chase. And what he does is say, I had lots of secrets or lots of classified information. That never met the light of day. But that's you. That's you. That's only you. And the amount of, and so he's declaring, I never leak secrets, so they must not leak. Well, that's a bad assumption. That's just a bad basis for an argument, because what we know is that you can't hold secrets very effectively in the U.S. And by the way, just for 1 second, think about what it would take for this undertaking. You're thinking about UFOs, but I'm thinking about logistics. How many truckloads of X need to go there? What kind of chemicals? What kinds of spectrographs and stuff to test materials? Somewhere along the line, your supply chain gets to be compromising on an operation that was big enough to hold the same problem we had with Lazar. Well, how does all this work? How does that work? How does this other thing work? Somehow or another, all those pieces of equipment have to get there, and nobody can talk. And trust me, there's some truck driver somewhere who was talking in the truck stop. Hey, I put this thing on the back of my truck the other day and drove in down there. What was it? And people collect intelligence that way. If you don't think that's true, look at TikTok and all those systems and tools, or any of your social media, all the crap that people put out there, that they can build a very quick image of you, and AI can do it for them. So look, it would be really hard to hide something this big, and all those leaks that he's not taking into account while he does his resume statement are part of the thing. The minute he gets back to opinion and belief, he starts to illustrate and do all those things again. But every time you ask him a fact, he gets very, very contained. And again, I'm going to say it may be because that whistleblower does not protect his sources, and he may be ready to compromise them, so we have to be careful with it. But he's got the straightest face we've seen yet in the beginning of this when he's talking about, I never divulged information. Scott, what do you got?
All right. This is the part that backs up my point earlier, where he says, I've heard plenty of stuff I shouldn't be talking about, and I've never said a word about any of it. But he's talking about this. None of this stuff is top secret. None of this stuff is a secret at all. It's all been okayed, and he's just out talking about it for whatever reason. Mark, what do you got?
No, he's not really talking about it.
Yeah,
that's true too. That's true too. He's just saying,
not really saying shit.
I'm so
words, not content.
I'd say from my point of view, having sat in meetings where they are closed meetings and we know what's happening in the meetings cannot be talked about. They are secret meetings. There's all kinds of stuff that people say in that. Why don't those secrets get out? Because they're boring. They're just bureaucratic, boring. My guess is he has a whole bunch of top secret stuff that he knows that he's never told anybody else. Why? Maybe because he's very diligent. 2, because it's bureaucratic, boring stuff. Nobody would ever listen to it. If you said, I'm going to tell you a secret, and you told them, they'd just go, like, what do you mean? What do you mean? It's apropos of nothing, but everything in a meeting. When you have a certain meeting, what biscuits did you have? I can't tell you. It's a secret. It's a secret what biscuits you have. Everything is a secret in there. If I were to tell you, I might say Jaffa cakes. Now, maybe everybody would go, well, that's not a biscuit, that's a cake. Well, it's both a biscuit and a cake, and we'd have to get into the Jaffa cakes. Jaffa cakes. Yeah.
What is that?
Well, it's an English, everybody English will know, it's an English biscuit, okay, but it's counted as a cake. A cake is not taxed. A biscuit is taxed. Biscuit, cooked twice. The moment you cook something twice, there is a value-added tax to it. But if you call something a cake, but it's the size of a biscuit, it's cheaper because the government don't tax it. Anyway, you see what idiot pedantry people get into if you get inside the secrets of things. So most secrets aren't told because they're just plain old boring. Now, the interviewer has a very, in my mind, soft look of pleasure on his face as this subject talks about disinformation. I think the interviewer here knows that there is smells, can taste, there is something up around the idea of him talking about it not being disinformation and it feeling a little bit to the interviewer like disinformation.
Because he knows it's bullshit.
Go back, look at that interviewer's face and just see if you can see the smile of irony on his face. He does it all the time. As he hears all of this. Now, let me just get into some nitty-gritty of this. There's a complaint
Ross Coulthard is getting a kick out of this shit. Again, because every time he gets these stupid little things that he gets giddy about, Cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. That's more people that he's going to come to this podcast. It's more books he's going to sell. It's going to build the Ross Coulthart legitimacy train. And yeah, Ross does that shit all the time.
Retaliation.
IG complaint. So he has to be very careful if he's.
That's true too. He's just saying, yeah, I'm so.
Words, not content.
What I'd say from my point of view, having sat in meetings where they are closed meetings and we know what's happening in the meetings cannot be talked about. They are secret meetings. There's all kinds of stuff that people say in that. Why don't those secrets get out? Because they're boring. They're just bureaucratic secrets. Oh, you're spitting me. That's not a biscuit. That's a cake. Talks about disinformation can taste. There is something up around the idea of him talking about it not being disinformation and it feeling a little bit to the interviewer like disinformation. Go back, look at that interviewer's face and just see
really
if you can see.
Like, if is this entire Dave Grusch expose disinformation? Like, that's a genuine question. If so, why? What is the purpose of it? I think these are questions that need to be asked to lawmakers. There's a good reason why lawmakers are not coming out and backing this story, because they know it doesn't smell right. Staffers have told them to stay away from it. Good sense has told them to stay away from it.
The smile of irony on his face as he hears all of this. Now, let me just get into some nitty gritty of this. There's a complaint of retaliation. Complaint of retaliation. So this is the Inspector General complaint that's out there. It's a complaint about retaliation. Okay, and that has gone from an ex IG to the new IG. But so when he says, look, your allegations are credible. The allegations are credible. The allegation being made is not one that there's flying saucers. The IG haven't gone, it's credible that you're saying there's flying saucers.
Digital Vortex.
The allegation being made is one of him fearing retaliation. And the IG has said, yeah, that's a credible. Now, he's mixed the two up. He hasn't said, no, look, if you think my complaint is about people aren't paying attention to my idea that there's interdimensional beings down, that's not the case, okay? The IG is paying attention to a complaint of potential retaliation going on, that he's not telling us that. So he's conflating the two things together, and that, by his own logic, is disinformation. That's all I got on that one.
Beautiful. Good. That was beautiful.
Thank you. Just the bit on Jaffa cakes or the rest of it as well?
Jaffa
no
cakes
wonder we
delicious.
left England, man. They charge you once you cook it twice?
Yes.
They charge for all kinds of stuff.
Yes. Cook it once, that's not a luxury. Cook it twice, that's a luxury. That's value-added tax.
Have you never noticed English beer glasses have a line that you don't fill past?
Oh, the measurements there are insane.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You get taxed on that much.
Scott, did you ever hear of the window tax? They started taxing people's windows, so they bricked them up.
Yeah.
Avoid the tax. Go around old England, you'll see bricked up windows to the side.
One of those tape
Secrets. Since the determination is
Reason blow as the inspector.
they not
All right, Mark, what do you think we've seen at this point? How's it look to you?
Yeah, what do I think we've seen? Well, I'm glad to be at towards the end of it all now. I think we've potentially seen a pedantic, grudge-bearing individual with the potential, I think, for unwittingly or wittingly being a source of disinformation. Chase, what do you reckon?
I'm going to go long on this. I apologize. I sat for a while this morning trying to figure out just what it is that's making me uneasy about this whole thing. It feels dark to me, and it feels like something is off about this.
Those were the exact words for my last show of UCR. Something is not right about this. It's wrong. Something's wrong. And the fact that they're picking up on that in one interview, these guys are really, it tells me they're really paying attention to what's being said and how it's being said and how it's being delivered. Again, it's not 100%, but the fact that that's what I mean, let's listen to that again, because I think that's so important. There's something dark about this. Yeah, at the surface level, it's idiotic. But once you dig past that surface level, there's something going on here. And it's got a dark element to it. And it's really hard to put your finger on. And it doesn't seem like anybody has a real good answer as to why it's like that. But something's not fucking right.
I apologize. I sat for a while this morning trying to figure out just what it is that's making me uneasy about this whole thing. It feels dark to me, and it feels like something is off about this. And it has the feeling of a person involved in something bigger than themselves, as if they were maybe told to make this happen. Maybe.
Thank you, James Craig. I appreciate it. Keep bringing the truth. I mean, again, I'm just trying to speak my truth and my version of things and how I see it now in a world where we've gotten close to these things. I don't know what the hell the truth is. I really don't. I just do know that something's wrong with this whole narrative. Something is definitely wrong. I think that's true. The details of what that wrong is, man, it could be a spectrum of things. It could be multiple things. We're going to have to wait and see. Only time will tell. Only time will tell.
Told to blow the whistle in an orchestrated way. And this has the hallmarks. This has the hallmarks of a disinformation campaign. I'm the guy that trains the U.S. Army Psychological Operations Command on.
Listen to what he's saying here. Eventai, thank you for the $5 donation. Lou, a show where you have a few people on and try to break down the ick into more identifiable elements could be cool. It's really hard to define. It is hard to define. And it's honestly, it's hard to edit. And it's not hard to edit and find. It's just a lot of work. But I do have, I've got a perfect example, and maybe we'll watch it after this real quick, of how Ross Coulthard gives you truth while lying at the exact same time. Pretty sure it's on my playlist, but we'll check it out. Chase is sexy. I can't argue that. Can't argue that.
And this has the hallmarks. This has the hallmarks of a disinformation campaign. I'm the guy that trains the U.S. Army Psychological Operations Command on this stuff. Unusual tonality, like we saw here, happens often on stage. Unusual and repetitive phrases happen often on stage. Immediate delivery of lines without taking time to process questions happens on stage. Lack of anger about things you're supposed to be angry about happens on stage. Immediate mouth closure after delivery of lines happens on stage. Vagueness happens when questions are asked that aren't in the script on stage.
Yeah.
This feels staged or somehow artificial, and I'm not saying it is by any means any of that, because maybe he believes most of this. I think it's possible he believes most of this, but something is very off and almost seems dark about this. And the second thing I wonder about is whether this is about the greater good or him, if the first thing isn't true. Greg?
Yeah, so we're following the same path. Let me tell you this. There's two things. I'm going to give you two possibilities and then talk about something specific. First of all, when you are swimming in oil, you begin to think that oil's okay. Or as I say, fish taste like what they swim in. So if a fish swims in oil, they taste like oil. If, in fact, what you've been doing for the past 10 years, 6 years, 4 years is talking to people who have seen UFOs, you then become much, much, much more susceptible to whatever you hear. You know, skeptics, even if all they hear every day is UFO talk, UFO talk, UFO talk, it gets more difficult for them to discern. So let's assume for a minute that he's been doing these interviews and interviews and interviews, and now somebody comes along and says, hey, we got a bunch of them back behind the door. Now he falls for that. Now he becomes a true believer. That's one possibility. The other possibility is he's an outright disinformation campaign. The reason I feel like he's more like the second is because I see that squelched smile. It's not a compress, contain emotion or information. It looks more than one time with that chin boss eruption and all that, like he's trying to contain a smile because his upper face is smiling. So then I go, okay, if it's disinformation, why? Is that disinformation because he's disgruntled? Is that disinformation because of something? But there are also two really good indicators that he is hurt, bitter, or something. Mark, the bitter girlfriend, the bitter boyfriend thing in there, that you can't miss. So those two pieces, I think, Chase, it's one of the two, in my opinion, and I don't conjecture which. I just say these are my options that I can see. And then when you add that bitterness, it makes it dark and makes you wonder, what's going on here? Scott, what do you got?
I think this guy's on a mission. I think he's been set to say this, whether somebody said here, like you were saying, you got to go say this, but this is on purpose. I really think this is disinformation. And I think this has been set up by somebody else. At the beginning, he says, I always want to be a part of something that was bigger than me, just like you were saying, Chase. I always want to be a part of that. And by doing this, by being the sacrificial lamb, is what it's supposed to look like, then that's what he's doing. It's about time for him to get out anyway, with what he's doing. Why not go ahead and do that? And if all these people came to him pretty much in this short amount of time, start talking to him about it, why would they choose him to talk about it? Why would these people be telling him other than that? So whether it's something he's at the beginning just said, you know what, I will do that, or they pushed him out of it and he doesn't realize it. I think he does realize what's happening, but there's always that chance that he didn't realize that's what happened. But I think he's on a mission. I think he's doing this on purpose, and not for the morality of it or the ethics of it at all. But that's just what he puts it on. So he has to get angry and come up with his anger when he talks about that. I think that's why we're seeing that there. But he always wanted to be part of something that's bigger than him, and this is the way he can do that, because he's not going to get in trouble for what he's saying. He's already okayed or had okayed everything that he would talk about. So I'll end it by saying I think he was on a mission. All right, fellas, I think this is another good one, and we'll see you next time.
So what do you got?
All four of them came to the conclusion that this guy is on a mission. I mean, like, we'll get to this Ross Coulthard video in a second, and we've been going for almost 3 hours now, so we got to end this show. I mean, that was a long show, but I thought it was important to go through every single part of their analysis so we can slowly see how they got to the conclusion of this feels like disinformation. Every single one of them said this guy is an actor. He's acting these lines. He knew these lines before. They all in agreement on that. Completely in agreement. And we saw where it started. We saw where it started, where it was Mark, the only one. Mark was the only one who was right from the start, did not believe a fucking thing this guy said. And as they all started talking about it and rationalizing it and giving each other's opinions and listening to each other and breaking down the video, they all came to the conclusion that this is an acting job. And it's got a dark element to it. It's disinformation with a dark element to it. All I'm saying is this is not 100%. This isn't science. But it should be a warning to you if you're really 100% in the belief corner of Dave Grusch. You really should have a higher standard of evidence. Set your bar higher, because this is really, really low. And I think these guys perfectly pointed out that the bar is super low. If you're believing this, you're in a lower echelon of intelligence. Essentially is what they said, if you believe this story. Yeah, it's wild. Absolutely wild. But here is a clip real quick. I want to show you guys that I edited. And this is exactly how I think these guys tell the truth while lying at the exact same time. So listen to this.
And I suspect that there is some black technology that can explain at least part or some of this phenomenon. Perhaps even the Tic Tac.
Perhaps even the Tic Tac. Perhaps even the Tic Tac. Perhaps even the Tic Tac.
He just tells you right there. I suspect that some of these eyewitness testimony are black projects. Perhaps even the Tic Tac. And look at his fucking face when he says this shit. Like, he does this shit all the time. All the time. Watch his face.
I suspect that there is some black technology that can explain at least part or some of this phenomenon. Perhaps even the Tic Tac.
Perhaps
look at
even
that.
The Tic Tac. Perhaps even the Tic Tac. Perhaps even the Tic Tac.
Perhaps Ross Coulthart is also part of this disinformation campaign. If there is a campaign, which it seems like there is, a sophisticated disinformation campaign, just like they told you. They told you right to your face that there's a sophisticated disinformation campaign going on around the narrative of UFOs. They told you in the interview. You guys, I don't know what more we have to do from our end to get you to start seeing this in a little bit more rational way. We're going to do our best here. I think moments like this are great. The beautiful thing about this video also is that it has almost 200,000 views and has 6.6 thousand likes and only 845 dislikes. So rationality is winning in this video. The rational side of the conversation, I think, is winning. I think overall, I said that this story was dead on arrival, and it was. It got a little bit of a wave. We experienced the biggest part of this Grusch rush, and that was immediately destroyed by mainstream media, rational thinkers, videos like this. I think channels like ours, where we actually look at the claims and try to break them down as best we can. And it was really clear right from the start, there were no facts with this story. Zero facts. Zero. And they even said themselves, I mean, if we had just one fact, just one, we might feel a little better about believing this narrative. But there are none. It's moments, yeah, man. I mean, be careful. Be careful of the information that you consume. Be careful who you believe. If people are rushing to believe something, pump the brakes and wait for all the data to come out. Wait for John Greenwald to say something about it. Wait for Mick West to say something about it. Wait for us to say something about it. Wait for a Hello. Oh, there we go. I think I hit mute over here on this side. Sorry, guys. Anyway, it's been a long show. Just be careful out there. The information that you guys get, again, if somebody's rushing to, oh my God, this is true, it's the most amazing thing in the world, just pump the brakes and wait for the clear, more rational adults in the room to comment on what the hell's going on, because we can't rely on Ross Coulthart, we can't rely on Lou Elizondo, we can't rely on Skyfort or Sean Cahill or the Good Trouble Show or that UFO podcast or any of these guys that have the access to these maniacs. You can't trust them. They've been compromised, either knowingly or unknowingly. I think a lot of them are just protecting access and the money stream, and then truth is third or fourth on the list. They don't give a shit. Again, here we are, the biggest whistleblower in the history of UFOs, and not one of the 365-day-a-year activists have done anything to organize people to call Congress and get more answers out of this story. If it's so true, where's all your passion? Where's all your organization? Where's all your care for the truth? Where is it, guys? Where is it? Non-existent. It's fake. It's fake. Anyway, you guys, have a killer night. I have no idea when we're going to be on next. But thank you all so much for tuning in. Some new folks in the chat that I've never seen before: Morgan Marshall, Tony Mahoney, Venny Coxis, thank you so much. Silly Goose, James Craig, thank you all for being here. Thank you for letting me know when my mic is dead. Audio, you guys are like yelling. Holy shit, I'm just going back. Wow, how long was I talking with no volume? A good 5 minutes. Let's see. Muted at 47, and I was muted all the way until 2 minutes. 2 full minutes of no sound. All right, you guys have a killer night. I'll see y'all soon. Be safe out there. Peace. Oh, by the way, I saw that Chris Lito, YouTube deleted his freak out video. I have not watched it, and he just posted it on Twitter. I recommend somebody go download and record that whole thing before it's gone forever, because I have a feeling he comes to say, I'm gonna go watch it right now. I'm dying to know what the hell he says in this now. Now I'm curious. Anyway, y'all, have a killer.